Hey, what is up? Welcome to another episode of Humans of Magic. My guest this week is Todd Anderson. Todd has been a competitive Magic player for a very long time. Chances are you may know him from his absolute dominance during the Star City Games era. Todd was one of the winningest, if not the winningest player during that time. And he has done so much. He's done writing, content creation, streaming, casting. He still casts for Apex Gaming these days. The thing I respect most about Todd is that he is just a straight shooter. He always says it like it is. We go into a lot of things that I believe he hasn't talked about that much in the past, including his legacy as a deck builder. I think he's one of the most prolific, if underrated, deck builders of all time. So we'll also get into that. So please enjoy this conversation with Todd Anderson. Before we get into the episode, I'd like to give a little plug for my Patreon, patreon.com/humansofmagic. This is where you can show a little bit of extra support for the show. This is something that I do part-time as a labor of love, as a passion project, and your support would help keep the show going. It's where you can get access to the exclusive Discord community. You can preview new episodes before they come out. If you choose the higher level tier, you can get the Humans of Magic digital book, where I've interviewed several prolific Magic players in text format. That's quite an enjoyable thing if you're into that. And most importantly, just support the show. Your support means a lot, and I take nothing for granted. Now, let's get to the Todd Anderson episode. Do you still do you still do one for Lorcana, right?
Yeah, we just started one for Lorcana. I've been a guest on a bunch of podcasts for Magic, but I've never started my own. Felt like a little too much on my plate back when I was doing written content, traveling every weekend, and stuff for Star City. But nowadays, I'm asking myself why I don't have one.
I mean, streaming is a lot of work, isn't it? I mean, streaming is still your main thing, is it not?
So my Twitch channel is currently like my main broadcast point, but I would say that I use Twitter way more than I use anything else. And I know that's not really content, but like I keep up with everything Magic related constantly. And when I do stream, it's usually just Pioneer, and it's just because that's one of the most pure formats left that people actually care about. And I just really enjoy deck building. So I like streaming, but it certainly doesn't pay very much, and I use it more of like a way to broadcast all my other stuff because I do have a big following on there.
Yeah, this is kind of like inside content talk or inside baseball talk, but I often hear people say that streaming is more work than it's worth, but then it's just a way to get onto somebody's second monitor so that you're always in there in the background, like your face is always there. So whether you're casting or you're streaming, like it's just a way to get people to remember a certain person, right? Even though it's technically harder work than maybe writing or having a Patreon guide or tweeting, or I guess it's not tweeting anymore, but I still call it tweeting because I'm old.
It's so. Zeeting.
Yeah, Zeeting. Yeah, exactly. So, but I feel like the stream audience has got to be the most committed, loyal audience, even if it's hard to get them, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I tell most people who want to start streaming that it's a nightmare because you have to like come with some amount of background. Like you can't just start from scratch because people just have, their 5 streamers that they watch, and whenever one of them goes offline, they just swap to one of the other ones. And they go to those people because they make content about the formats that they like, or they just like their personality, or, they've just been following them for so long. And if you don't have a background in the game already, it's nigh impossible. And a couple of my friends have started recently, and they're streaming to 2 viewers for hours and hours. And I tell them that it's important that you do it. And it's important that you also use it for content on other platforms. Like you need to be posting on like TikTok, and you need to be using YouTube and making the YouTube shorts as well. And one of the biggest things that helped me in the last couple of years was just making a YouTube channel to accompany the Twitch channel, because it's just a place where all of your recorded stuff, it'll eventually disappear into the ether. Twitch only holds it for like 30 days. And if you don't have it on YouTube, it's just going to go away forever. So I've just been posting all my VODs to there. That's basically all I do. And it's successful. Like, people, whenever I go to events, it's rare these days, but when I do go to events, people come up to me and they don't say, "Hi, I love your stream. I'm a big fan of like this deck you streamed the other day." They're like, "I like your YouTube videos," because I think YouTube just has a better hit rate for players because they can just engage with the content at their own discretion and on their own time frame. And I just think, that's way more important to hit multiple points as opposed to just relying on one entry point into making content.
Yeah, it's always about repurposing. It's like you do it on one, but you can almost repurpose or recycle it on different things. You can, I like to call it like remixing. You can cut it up, like you can you can do little clips, and when people type Pioneer on YouTube, they can still find your stuff, right? That's what it's about. Yeah. I think you have been one of the most consistent folks doing Pioneer content for a while, and you've kind of been very out there and vocal about the format as well. Tell me about how you even started getting into Pioneer. Was that because you felt like there was a space there that no one was really quite hitting, or was it related to events, or what was it?
So the day that they announced Pioneer as a format, it was like a Monday or a Tuesday, and it wasn't on Magic Online yet, and I was supposed to stream that day. I've been streaming Modern for a couple months. I'd moved to full-time streaming. My wife Callie and I moved out to California, where she got a job working at Blizzard, and so I went from making like in-house videos with Star City Games, to not. And so I needed more income than just like my weekly article revenues. So I decided to start streaming full-time. I'd been on and off streaming for a couple years at that point, mostly due to internet issues from the one provider that existed in Roanoke at the time. And when we moved to California, I didn't have that problem. And so streaming full time, I got super into Modern, playing all the time on Magic Online, because I just didn't really like Magic Arena that much. And then they say, "Hey, there's this new format coming out. It's Pioneer. It's Return to Ravnica Forward." And in my brain, that's just like, maybe a perfect format, because that's basically where the start of all the best standard formats came from in the last decade and change. And on day 0, I was on Magic Online playing against a friend of mine on stream. And it was immensely popular for the first 2 months because of the aggressive ban waves that they would do once every week or two. And so it was like a constantly evolving metagame that I was always on the top of and I was pushing. And I got really popular early on in Pioneer because of Mono Green Devotion. It wasn't even a deck that I originally built, but it was a deck that I saw looked good, and I iterated on it. And then within a week, there was a PTQ on Magic Online, and I was playing the Mono Green Devotion deck, and I ended up getting second on stream. It was a huge psychological blow. Losing the finals of something is always really tough when first place is like an intangible prize and second place is steak knives. And I still remember that moment fondly now in hindsight, because people still talk about it. They're like, "Hey, do you remember when you streamed Mono Green Devotion and Pioneer and you blew up the
Do you
whole
remember?
format?"
Of course you remember,
Yeah.
right? Like it was yesterday.
Yeah, and so, they ended up banning like 5 cards out of the deck, and it's still really good, and they're going to ban Karn on Monday, so.
Yeah. This gives away when we record it. When we are recording this, yes. But so you do think that's going to be a surety. I don't know if that is surety a word or it's a certain thing.
It's not a certainty. It was heavily implied by Dan Musser on the interview that they did. But regardless, Pioneer has been a place to brew decks, and it has always been a place to brew new decks. And making decks is one of the biggest pleasures for me in Magic, and being able to consistently have new sets affect the card pool in ways that actually can create new archetypes as opposed to just beefing existing archetypes. It's extremely difficult to make standard power level cards and shove them into Modern. And often when they do make it into Modern, it's because there's some extremely powerful combination of things, or they just turn the dial a little too hard on design. And a lot of times those cards end up getting banned. And in Pioneer, sometimes that happens, but more often than not, you just have yet another Pioneer deck, which ends up being one of the most powerful things you've ever seen, but it still loses to Thoughtseize. So,
Yeah, that's par for the course. Are you? I'm trying to figure it out by the way you described the format, but are you happy, okay overall with the way that Wizards has curated the Pioneer format?
I think that they have done a relatively poor job throughout its history of maintaining what I would consider to be a healthy format. There was a long period of time between the release, I believe, of Theros Beyond Death, where they printed, Uro and a number of other problematic cards, Thassa's Oracle. There was actually like a 3 to 6 month period where combo decks were just reigning supreme, and there was like nothing we could really do about it. So most of us just quit playing for a while, and after enough people stopped playing, they started banning stuff, but it was like way too late. There was like Dimir Inverter, Ballista Heliod, Lotus Field combo with Underworld Breach, and then Uro as like the de facto control finisher. And so like you couldn't play an aggressive deck because Uro beat you, and you couldn't play a control deck because the combo decks were like too strong, and the combo decks just morphed into control decks anyway, like the Dimir Inverter stuff. So we had a really bad couple months there. It fell off a little bit. Then COVID happened. We all started playing from home only. I think Pioneer kind of died over the next 2 years where no one really was able to play it in paper. And people, they didn't play Standard at all either. And so the pipeline for a long time was play Standard, your cards will rotate, and you'll be able to play them in Modern. And then they had a place to rotate and to play into, which was Pioneer. But with no one playing Standard because there were no tournaments, and most of the players who were buying cards were buying Commander cards, or they were buying things from Modern that would specifically stay legal for like a long period of time. On top of that, the direct-to-print stuff for Modern made it so, like, why would you ever bother playing Standard? There's Modern Horizons 1 and 2. These have a much larger impact on your most popular constructed format, Modern. Why would we play Standard? And then people don't have cards for Pioneer, and so no one plays Pioneer either. That was kind of the gist.
Yeah, what do you call that? Like, not even a double whammy, but a quadruple whammy of, like, a confluence of things. Just,
yeah.
It was impacting bad. Each other. Yeah.
Some stuff their fault, some stuff not. They took a really heavy hand early, and then they kind of just like let it simmer for a while. And I think they should have continued the aggressiveness in terms of banning for much longer. But it is what it is. And I think that the last 2 years, Kelly and I, we ended up moving back to Roanoke. She worked at Star City Games for a little while, but now she's working at Gen Con, helping to put on that big show every year.
Oh, cool.
And, I was still writing for Star City Games for almost a year when we moved back as well. And then they did the big drop off for the content creators. And so now we still live in Roanoke, but very few of our friends or family work for Star City anymore. They used to be like this huge hub of, I don't know, just like a place where people who enjoy Magic can work and like be involved in the industry. And now it seems like most people have moved on. And, but we're still here. We love living here. We have a bunch of friends that live here now, transplants from all over, as well as people who just, lived here even before we moved here. But I don't know. We'll see. I'm hoping that things come back in a big way for Star City at some point so that we can all rejoice in the collective boon.
I definitely want to ask you more about that, but I want to go back a little bit to something you said.
Yeah.
And this is something I want to ask you because you're a very high-level Magic player, and I feel like you're the right person to ask this question. I always feel like when it comes to format Magic discourse, there's this kind of like top-level players defending formats for having broken decks, but this is a terrible way for me to describe it, but like I'm just thinking about the inverter era of Pioneer or the Splinter Twin era of Modern, where it was possible to defend certain decks existing because they said it's very skill intensive, very interactive. The mirrors were highly intensive, And yet there's this other voice, which is kind of like I'll call it the general Magic public voice, which is like, these are not fun decks to play with or against, and they're pushing other decks out of the format. And I feel like you've always had a very balanced voice that kind of straddles the two, where you are a high level player, like you understand how play patterns go and how skill wins out in these mirrors or like formats where decks are broken, or maybe there's ways to fight it. But at the same time, you're also speaking for the everyday Magic player. I always felt that, like when I watch your streams or like read what you have to say, like you look out for, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but you look out for like the average Magic player that's trying to play these formats, and you speak out when it's just not fun, even though you may personally be okay with it, like from a competitive sense. So I'm wondering like how you see that situation. Is it just like ad nauseum, like this always happens where, like you have people who just want to always defend something, you have people that always just don't like power decks? Like how do you view formats from these different types of lenses?
So I think my understanding of Magic comes from experience. Just 2 decades of playing tournaments and just being completely devoted to the game in terms of being a student of it, and also understanding that what sells Magic as a game is the fact that it's fun, and also the fact that it can be interactive, where you and your opponent are basically just exchanging resources back and forth until one person comes out on top through a series of better decisions than the opponent. In Pioneer specifically, those better decisions go past the game and into deck building, sideboarding, and mulliganing way more than any other format I've ever played. And what you end up getting in Pioneer a lot of times is a matchup between two decks where neither of them wants to interact, and so it becomes essentially a game of solitaire where two people are racing to the finish line, completely devoid of any interaction from the other side. Now, that doesn't mean that there's 0 interaction points. That just means that the amount of interaction on average is significantly smaller than your Thoughtseize deck or your Counterspell deck or whatever. A lot of these people, they pick up, let's say, Mono Green Devotion, and they get hammered by another combo deck, and they're just like, wow, Pioneer sucks. It's like, well, first of all, you chose the deck you chose because it's difficult to interact with, and its weakness is that it loses to other Glass Cannon combo decks because you're both ignoring each other, and they are on the extreme of let's say a 1 turn faster kill than Mono Green Devotion, but their exploitation points are significantly greater than Mono Green's exploitation points, which are essentially just pressure the elves or not. And so when it comes to like decks like Dimir Inverter, for example, this is going to be the one that I think most people latch onto the most because it was the one that was maybe the most volatile ban in the last 5 years. It was Splinter Twin. And however people want to argue with me on that, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's literally a 2-card combo with 1 card that's pretty good to cast by itself, 1 card that's pretty mediocre to cast by itself, a ton of interactive elements from Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, card draw things, so you're playing like this control game. And then ultimately, you get to play one of the most degenerate draw spells of all time in Dig Through Time, and it's a functional part of how your deck wins the game by exiling your own graveyard. Now, you could make a significant argument that they should have banned Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time instead of Inverter of Truth. I would have been fine with that. I think many people thought that that's what they were going to do because Treasure Cruise kept popping up, and Phoenix and a number of other blue combo decks, from like Jeskai Ascendancy combo to anything else. I think that the people who really liked playing Dimir Inverter still defend it to this day, and I think that they are somewhat right to do so because it's a deck that they enjoyed playing, and it did not have like an aggressive win percentage in terms of the 56% or 57%, which is usually the benchmark for this deck is too good. And so what ended up happening is you had this extremely complex deck where 5 of the best Magic players in the world won a bunch of tournaments on Magic Online, and Magic Online was like the only place where you could really play it. And so the average win rate, though, of your normal player was somewhere closer to 48%, 47%. And then the best players would probably get close to 60%. I remember Ghoul Dukat, Canister, these were players just like crushing every event with this archetype. As far as the reason why I was banned, I think it was because people just really despise losing in such a way that feels unnatural. And when you're playing against Dimir Inverter, it's literally just a pure race from start to finish. And if you are not the one pressing the issue, you will almost always lose. And even if you are pressing the issue, they can go Thoughtseize you on 1, Fatal Push you on 2, do something else on 3, Inverter on 4, kill you on 5. And that was like every single game you played against them, they would have that curve more than likely, and you would lose. And I called it a flaccid win condition because the game would end in such a way that was not exciting to watch. It was not exciting to lose to it. And I can't imagine it was that exciting to win with it. You're literally just assembling a 2-card combo that says, I win. And both halves of the combo are relatively difficult to stop because Inverter, being in Enters the Battlefield effect, exiled, your whole deck. And so the only way you could really interact with it was with a counter spell or a discard spell that took it preemptively. And then you have Thassa's Oracle, where even if you kill Thassa's Oracle, if there are 0 cards left in the deck, you still win. And so you had these two just like really kind of messed up cards working together in such a way that created some of the most unfun Splinter Twin-esque wins. And this is also just a couple of years after Splinter Twin was banned in Pioneer. And they also had a precedent for banning 2-card combos like this because they banned Felidar Guardian because it did basically the same thing
with
Saheeli Rai. And so I think it was a justifiable ban. People were overly mad about it, but at the end of the day, man, like you just have to look at how do the games feel. And as someone who played, probably 1,000, 2,000 games in that specific Pioneer format, it was not fun. And it made playing a lot of strategies against Dimir Inverter actively frustrating to play against and with the deck. And I think I can sum it up about as best I can in an anecdote from one of my friends who plays casually. He used to watch my stream a lot, and he would play maybe one tournament a year. But I went to Indianapolis for one of the Star City events right before COVID lockdown, and I played a mono red deck that had Collective Defiance, I think. It was the one where target player wheels, where they discard their hand and draw, but it also dealt 4 or 3 to player. And I just used that to kill Inverter players straight up because they would play Inverter, flip their deck, and then I would just wheel them and they would die. And my buddy Little Nuki, he did the same thing because he was like playing the same thing as me, but he still lost to the deck a couple times. And as he was like playing the games, he was just like, yeah, they just had Inverter on 4 and Oracle on 5 and I died. I don't know why I even came. And that sentiment alone is reason enough to ban something when a relatively new player just doesn't get it. And there are so many combinations in Magic where you just put 2 things together and those 2 things say infinity because the game engine has limitations. And so when you create 2-card infinity, whether it's win the game or actual infinity like creatures, damage, mana, whatever, you have to be extremely careful in a competitive environment where every single piece of the deck is geared towards finding and assembling the 2-card infinite combo. And when you have an entire format like Pioneer was for a little while, where it was Dimir Inverter combo, Heliod Ballista combo, which is another animal entirely, and then Lotus Field combo, which was honestly just kind of a 2-card combo as well, because it was like Lotus Field plus Underworld Breach was just a straight up kill with so many cards. And you just get to the point where it's like, oh, 3 of the best 4 decks all play this 2-card combo. Why would I bother? And that was a big sentiment for a couple months and ended up just leading to just an enormous number of bans all at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's not the same logic, but how does the logic apply to something like Karn, which is really a 1-card thing? It's not a 2-card combo. Is Karn just it's broken in different ways, but how would you describe it exactly?
So Karn the Great Creator is a Swiss Army knife that its strength grows almost not quite exponentially, but it grows significantly based on the amount of mana you have at any given moment. I would say that if you have 10 mana, Karn is incredible. If you have 9, 8, 7, 6, it gets worse and worse and worse over time. If you have infinite mana, you win the game. And so you basically add this 4-cost Planeswalker to a deck that plays Nykthos Shrine of Nyx, and it gives you an out to every scenario. It gives you a win condition, and it also gives you an infinite combo. And so I don't think a mono green deck that is possibly the most explosive and consistent ramp deck I've ever seen, they do not deserve a win condition that can combo kill as a one card thing. And Karn the Great Creator, you know, through a series of self-owns, like self-goals or whatever, own goals, what do they call it in soccer, has effectively been able to become a combo card because of the card Pestilent Cauldron, right? Just like a nothing artifact from the Strixhaven set, because the back of it is a regrowth. And it even exiles itself as a protective measure against bringing it back and doing it over and over again.
That's what happened. Yeah, it's at any time it can help you. It's a toolbox to get something else that's broken in conjunction with it. So
yeah. There's a lot of other reasons that Karn's being banned. You know, it limits your ability to play artifacts in the format. You know, the static effect on it is also just extremely pressuring for so many decks. I don't know, man. I thought Karn was going to get banned a year ago. I actually was curious when I tweeted that it was going to get banned in the next 3 months. It was October of last year. I said it would get banned in the next 3 months. I'm about a year off, but pretty close.
Better late than never, I guess, if it's good for the format, that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Admittedly, I'm really showing my lack of understanding of the Pioneer format. Like, I'll just let you know, I am probably most well-versed with Legacy and Modern. So it's really interesting to hear about how, you know, I understand what you're saying about Pioneer. It's like 2 ships passing the night. There's like, if you have extreme non-interactivity or like extreme predetermination in terms of how games play out, they're not fun. That's just kind of like how it's always been for Legacy. Like, Legacy is just inherently a broken format that has to be curtailed
But it's not, okay? Because both Legacy and Modern have
There's checks, though, sure.
Yes, they have checks, and for a long time, Modern was exactly like Pioneer, and it didn't have checks.
Pre-Modern Horizons, Modern was like 2 ships passing the night. That's how people always described it.
Right, and it's because the more powerful a format becomes, the more decks become like runaway trains, where they start small, but if you just add a little piece every single turn, there's nothing that a deck can do outside of having a button that just says I win. And so what you end up getting is threats that are slightly too powerful for the removal that beats them, and then people who just don't play that subgame and ignore that subgame in order to do 2-card combos. And then you have control decks that exploit the combo deck, you know, versus beating up on the aggro decks. The addition of a bunch of free spells, not even the elementals from Modern Horizons 2, but just
Force of Negation and stuff like that.
Force of Negation, I think, single-handedly put like a big band-aid over Modern as a whole, and it made it significantly more interactive. And I remember when they first made Modern Horizons 1, you know, myself, Ross Merriam, and a number of other people who worked on like Versus Live and other content avenues, like we played a lot with Force of Negation to just see how good it was, like similar, and how similar it was to like Force of Will. And alongside things like Young Pyromancer, it helped generate control decks in a place where those types of control decks did not exist before. Archmage's Charm, similarly really strong, did something very similar. And that was even a time, I think, when Mystic Sanctuary was legal as well, and so we were able to basically play like mono blue control, splashing Young Pyromancer, and we got to play Force of Negation, and that was enough, and that was like a good control deck. Now, you know, it's pushed far beyond in the other direction with the pitch elementals. So like Grief, Fury, these are ways to disrupt hand or creature in like really annoying ways, like not annoying, really efficient ways that are annoying if you're on the other side of the coin. And Solitude, very similarly, is extremely powerful, abusable with things like the flicker effects and we even see, out of the Recto scam decks, while they're about to get taken out back, like Old Yeller, like they have been extremely dominant ever since the Pro Tour. And even before the Pro Tour, Recto scam was widely considered to be the best deck. And it's because of the Evoke Elementals. They allow for an interaction point that is earlier and more impactful than any cards that have been printed
and that's
before.
Kind of similar to what you described for Pioneer with Inverter, right? Because if you've got the goods in your hand, the opponent just doesn't really get to do anything.
Yeah, and so whenever you pair a 2-card combo into a deck where both of the pieces just work kind of fluidly and inside the shell, it becomes a question more of what is the cost? What is the opportunity cost of playing with these cards? And when it comes to like Splinter Twin from back in the day, the card Deceiver Exarch kind of stinks, and the card Splinter Twin without Deceiver Exarch is a 0, doesn't do anything. And so you get to this point where you have to ask, like, what does it cost to play these cards in a control deck? In some games, you draw 2 or 3 of the Splinter Twins and you die because you just don't draw the other piece. Your opponent has 1 answer instead of like them needing 2 answers or what have you. And in Pioneer specifically, the tools for interacting with your opponent are not nearly as strong, but they are strong compared to just like the overall card pool. Specifically, Fatal Push and Thoughtseize are 2 interaction points that allow you to cover both extremes. Thoughtseize lets you interact in a way that prevents combo decks and control decks from interacting with you in the early turns. And Fatal Push buys you enough time against the aggro decks so that you can actually symbol the combo. And so when one combo deck gets to play both of these extremely potent pieces of interaction, they are covered from both sides. And then it becomes a question of whether or not your opponent is able to dodge one or both of these methods of interaction. And when you're playing Dimir Inverter, you can actually just if one of your 2 interaction points is good, then you're fine. You just have bought yourself enough time because the combo itself is just a little too hard to interact with. Like, it's just slightly too hard to interact with against either Push or Thoughtseize.
Yeah. Are you overall optimistic, not optimistic about competitive formats in general, like in just how Wizards has managed them? I know your lifeblood is that of a competitive player. I don't think you're about to go into Commander content or other types of things anytime soon. So is it like these 60 card formats? Do they do it for you? I know obviously a big part of it is like it is kind of your job to stay on top of things, but how do you feel about it overall?
So on top of streaming and physically playing games and watching streams and stuff all the time, I also have been doing like a significant amount of commentary, specifically over modern events. And what I've seen in modern is a lack of understanding from higher ups in terms of what the new cards are actually doing, like how they are warping the format itself. And so it makes it a little disheartening when, Up the Beanstalk, for example, comes out. They say they have this short window to ban on this one day that's about 10 days after the set's released or whatever. And the 10th day comes, everyone who's been playing it on Magic Online knows that it's busted. Everyone who is prepping for the weekend's events at Apex Gaming are aware that Beanstalk is busted. And if these people who play the game are aware, but the people who make the game are not, you have to see that
That's kind of scary.
There's a disconnect. There's just a disconnect. And the thing is, the way that they release cards now, they release so many over the course of a year that it's very easy for some to slip through the cracks. And we've seen from, like the mono white, the Plumeveil Adventure, what's it called? I'm sorry, White Plume Adventure, for example, the initiative mechanic in Legacy was detrimental to the format, and I still think it shouldn't exist in general. I think they should have, instead of banning some cards, they should have just reworked the mechanic.
Yeah,
in
initiative
general.
is still strong in Legacy, actually. So.
Right. And but what ended up happening is that they just made some cards for this like commander product or whatever, or conspiracy product, you know, like, do you remember True Name Nemesis? We're gonna get a little old here.
Absolutely. No, I am that old. Yes, I do
Yes.
remember when it was the broken thing in Legacy for a very long time.
Yeah, so that card was printed in a commander precon because when it comes into play, you choose an opponent, and that person is your nemesis. I don't know a single person who's ever put that into commander deck.
It's actually beyond useless in Commander. The
Right.
format's designed for.
But what it did was it sold those precons to people who played Legacy, and at the time, we had to play a lot of Legacy on the SCG tour. And so we had to buy the precons to get the cards. The same with for Containment Priest, there was like a mono white deck that had Containment Priest in it. And even Containment Priest was like a $20 card for a long time.
Yeah, before they reprinted the heck out of it. I remember that.
And so what ends up happening is that they make cards to sell products to a wider audience than what the intended audience is for the product itself.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of Infinity and all this other stuff too. So
yeah, and Infinity is particularly egregious.
Sorry, yeah.
It's particularly egregious, right? Because it's very clear that Infinity is for maybe 1% of the Magic population, but in order to sell it to more people, in order to convince stores to buy this product that's very clearly a gimmick for a small audience, they say, hey, these cards are now, they're legal in Commander, they're legal in Legacy, they're legal in Vintage, because they can do it, right?
Yep.
And now we just have, like, you know, Comet Stellar Pup just ruining games on turn 4 because you roll a bunch of D6.
I remember having to Hydroblast. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's all fun in games until you play against a 3-cost goblin that's like guaranteed to make 6 mana or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
I had a friend at the Legacy event explain to me the sticker goblin and all the stickers that he was putting in his deck box, and it was insane. Yeah, it was just like, oh my gosh, I can't even wrap my head around this.
Yeah, and I really don't mean to talk badly about folks who work at Wizards, because I actually have quite a few friends that work there, and I know how difficult of a job it is to create and market and test and tune all these types of cards. But I also recognize that when those things do fall through the cracks,
there needs to be some fast responses and understanding of reading the room and right, basically.
Right. So do you know Hall of Famer Frank Karsten?
Yes, Frank and I have actually met several times face to face. Yeah.
So I actually invited Frank to we had a Lorcana Invitational up at Apex Gaming back in October, and I invited him to come, and he accepted, but he asked if he could stay with me for like a week in between so that he could go to this other tournament that we were going to go to, and I said of course. And so I got to hang out with Frank Karsten for a week, which was incredible because he's just a genius. But what ended up happening was that I learned that like he's one of the main writers for the main Wizards website when it comes
for the mothership. Yeah.
Right, when it comes to specifically tournaments. So like when preparation for regional championships, what's coming up, aftermath, metagame reports, blah blah blah. Right. This is roughly 8 days after the new set has come out. I think technically it's only 3 days after it's been released live play, but it was about 8 days after it had been released on Magic Online. And I had already played a bunch, watched a bunch of Aspiring Spike streams, Doomwake streams, other good player streams that were all just playing Beanstalk, and they were just doing the most egregious things I'd seen in Modern in quite some time. But they were, instead of being a combo deck, they were a control deck with the dial turned up to 11, because every single time you would play one of the pitch elementals, it would replace itself. And the only downside of these elementals is that it's a 2-for-1 on the reverse side to use their abilities. And when you have a card that you can build a Cascade deck around, where every single time you do it, you actually gain resources, when the card Commandeer becomes main deckable, something is wrong.
Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Yes, it's just too ultra efficient, that engine, and it's just like, yeah.
Right. And so when Frank is here, we're talking about it, and he is mostly unaware of this deck. He has heard about it. He has not really seen it in action. And again, this is only about 3 days. This is like the Monday or Tuesday after a Friday release, but it's been on Magic Online since the Wednesday before, the Tuesday before. And so I'm explaining to him the deck, and he goes, "Oh, that's pretty good, I think." And I go, and I have to explain to him, basically the play patterns, why that they're like too good or too bad or whatever for the health of the game. And he goes, "Yeah, it's just an uncommon, right?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, they probably should have banned that." Like, but the way that they had limited themselves in the ban window, they didn't have enough time to get the information on what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so, it just kind of got glazed over. But then we had, a tournament the next weekend at Apex where Beanstalk was not really like that big of a problem because only 2 people played it in the event. But the play patterns on it and the best builds of it are just egregious. And we didn't even really start fully understanding how to build the deck until recently, because now, there's people like Oliver Tomiko playing last night on Switch Gaming or whatever, where they are using Time Warp with Endurance to just infinite turns you.
Mm-hmm.
And they just never run. I mean, they run out eventually. Like, it's not actually infinite, but how many turns do you really need in a row? But like, if you can just guarantee your deck is only 10 cards and one of them's a Time Warp, like, the game's over, man. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of worrying, is the fact that there's a kind of lack of awareness, because what you're saying is that basically formats or new sets, how they impact formats, like from day one, people are streaming, playing Moto, like they're figuring it out. So the if there's tech or if things are broken, it gets figured out extremely fast, and like basically literally day one or maybe day zero. But then Wizards not really having a good safeguard or mechanism or response mechanism to all this. That's always been the case, right? I guess they just never level up their capabilities in that, or has it regressed?
I don't know if it's regressed. They have a system in place, to my understanding, where they effectively have 1 to 2 people in house that one of their jobs is to monitor a format to make sure that things aren't going haywire. And even if those people do bring up red flags like Beanstalk, it still takes like a week or 2 of discussion and more evidence, right? They just always want to be extremely sure before they make any of these decisions, because they understand that banning a card has significant impact on the players, the retailers,
right,
secondary market, things like that.
Sorry to interject, but when we talk about like data and more evidence, isn't that just obvious if you just do data analysis? Like if someone, like, it's not even, sometimes it doesn't even have to be like a human call. It could literally just be like a bot that says like this, that says this card is so prevalent and it's winning this percentage of matches, right? I would have to assume.
So it depends on where you're extrapolating your data from. It's very difficult to extrapolate a significant amount of data from like the populace as a whole over a short period of time.
That's true.
And if you use data from specifically Magic Online, you have to take it with a grain of salt, because it's such a small pool of players that are all extremely, extremely aggressive in terms of metagaming, deck swapping. The cutthroats are willing to switch decks at a moment's notice. And when they see something new that looks really powerful, they bombard it. And what ends up happening is you just have a wave of people playing like Boros Convoke and Pioneer right when it first came out, right? And so
kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. People just all jump onto it, and then the data will be skewed. Yeah.
Right. And so they need just more time for things to kind of level out. They need to see if if players and formats can naturally adapt. And
right. That's fair.
For a lot of cards, it's perfectly fine to wait. But when the play pattern becomes cast a Beanstalk, draw a card, okay, pitch an elemental, kill your thing, draw a card, pitch an elemental, kill thing, draw a card. Just the first time you see that happen, you should be completely...
Something's not right here. Yeah.
Yeah. You just need to be more aware. And that's it. Beanstalk's probably going to go as well as my guess, but whatever.
Okay. My heuristic is that when things make their way to Legacy, even or basically all the formats, then something is pretty is well worth watching, right? I mean, you've got Legacy and like people playing Hooting Mandrills and like again, and of course Murktide, like you just drawing cards and it's just pretty. I think that's died down a little bit in the format, but yeah, it was pretty hot for a while, for a minute there too.
I gotta say, man, Murktide Regent's also cards I'm not a big fan of. I played. I mean, we talked about this a little before we started, but like I've been playing like aggressive blue decks basically my entire career, from Delver of Secrets to Splinter Twin. Just I love playing a 1-drop and then defending it with everything I have. And Delver of Secrets kind of encapsulates that for me because it's such an efficient threat. Murktide Regent is a like 2-cost minimum 7/7 or whatever, maybe 6/6 or 5/5 if you're very unlucky, and it flies. I don't get
Evasion.
it, man. And it even has more than that, because if you play another delve spell, it gets even bigger. So, the fact that it's dominating in Legacy and it was dominating in Modern for some time, it's not a shock to me, because I already thought the card was far too good as is. And I don't know, man. Like, I just don't get it. I don't understand how that
there was a
card's made.
microsecond when it was spoiled and people were like, is it good? And then a microsecond later, yes, it is very good. So
There's
you just have to play the card to know it's good.
Yeah, there's a card that was printed into like Legacy only, I think, through a commander set or one of those. It was like blue 5, and it was a 3/3 flyer, I think. And whenever you attack with it, you can play one of the cards that it delved.
It was an Ethereal Forager. It was the
Yes.
whale. I loved that thing for a very long time. That was one of the cards I loved. Yeah, but it was
Super
completely
cool.
obsoleted. So
Right, but it also played a game in a significantly different way, where if you didn't deal with it, it would slowly accrue advantages over time. Whereas Murktide Regent, if you don't deal with it, it kills you in 2 hits. It just kills you. There's no counterplay other than removing it. Yeah. And I don't know. That's basically just the difference in card design over the last couple of years. Is like Murktide Regent is allowed to exist, but like I can't play Green Sun Zenith or whatever. Like I don't get it.
Mm-hmm. I guess the defense is that it's just a creature, dies to removal, some very simplistic explanation for it.
But it even dodges Unholy Heat, which is like one of the premier removal spells from Modern Horizons. Like, it's just too big for any red removal spell to hit. They made a red removal spell that can kill Primeval Titan for 1 mana.
Yeah. And
it cannot kill Murktide Regent most of the time.
Not that I'm a designer, but at least make it like that that 4-drop 5/5 illusion where if you target it, it just dies or something, Like, have some drawback.
Some drawback? What do you mean? What do you mean some drawback? Creatures don't have drawbacks anymore, man.
No, they're just spells on a stick. Yeah, that's right. So I also wanted to ask you, like, I guess going back to you moving back to Roanoke. By the way, I didn't know that you were back in Roanoke because I thought you were still on the West Coast, but that's probably why we got our time zones mixed up. I have been to Roanoke once. It is a very nice place. And you mentioned just being back with your wife, and a lot of people are not there anymore. And like, so are you guys just going to be there for the foreseeable future, I guess, because of work circumstances and whatnot?
So we both work from home. I make my own schedule. She has her schedule that's like pretty much, she gets to work the hours that she chooses. And neither of us are really tied down here in terms of family or work. And so we have the ability to move if we need to. But we also have, a house here. So it's like hard to just sell your house and pick up, especially when we don't have a reason to. So just more so waiting for a reason. But, just down the street, Ross Merriam lives with a couple of other friends of mine. And, we go over there on the weekends and hang out and play yard games, and we go out to lunch with some of my other friends like once a week or twice a week, and it's an easygoing life that's pretty good. And I get to make the content I want for a living. It's pretty great.
Where did you grow up? Actually, it must have not been in Roanoke, right?
No, I was born in Birmingham, Alabama. Big Alabama fan. Roll Tide. Hope they beat Georgia tomorrow, but we'll see if they're able to defeat them. I moved back and forth between Alabama and Georgia a couple times growing up. My dad lived in Georgia. My mom lived in Alabama. Yada yada.
Yeah, yeah. And did you just find Magic at a young age? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, one of my best friends was just like playing it with another friend of mine at his house one day when I walked over. Like he lived a couple of houses down from me or whatever, and they're just sitting on the floor playing this new game that I'd never heard of called Magic, and one of them's got Prodigal Sorcerer with Curiosity on it, like hitting drawing a card, and the other one's got big black creatures and removal spells that can kill them, and I learned how to play that day and never really stopped since. And that was when I was 12 years old, maybe younger.
Were you always a gamer, or were you competitive in any way before that?
Oh, yeah. Even throughout high school, heavily competitive in sports, baseball, basketball, football. I even ran track for a year. Never really stopped being competitive. I have an older brother who is a year and a half older than me, and we were on like the same sports teams a lot growing up, and we would challenge each other all the time at live games, video games, sports, whatever. You name it, I'm competing. We even had this program in elementary school called Accelerated Reader, where whoever read the most books and took the most tests on the book, you'd get points based on how well you did on the tests. And whoever got the most points at the end of the year got a bike. And I didn't have a bike, and I wanted a bike. And you better bet your ass I read Gone with the Wind that year, which was worth a lot of points, and I won the bike.
Gone with the Wind. Did you read War and Peace? Did you find like all the longest novels out there?
Look, man, I read a lot of books. I probably read more books than anyone in that school that year, but I also cheesed the system because you just take a test on the book. And you know what is a movie is Gone with the Wind, which I had seen. And so I thought, I bet I can probably pass this test without even reading the book. And I did. And I got, an 8 out of... Yeah, and I got all the points for it. So suck it, nerds. I don't know. But that's how competitive I am, right? I find ways to stretch the engine, to push the system.
But it started with you and your brother? Is that like at home? Is that kind of how it always goes?
I mean, maybe. When he's like beating up on me, it feels like I'm not really doing a whole lot of winning. But then when I finally start fighting back, and I find ways to pinch him so he stops messing with me, and I find ways to make his life
It's like when you
miserable.
train with the weighted vest and then you take off the vest, you suddenly realize you're powerful. Yeah.
No, my brother and I, we were very competitive, but I love him a bunch. But I don't get to see him that much because he lives in Georgia and I live in Virginia. But I get to see him around Christmas, and I got to see him during the summertime. So I'm excited about it, and maybe we'll play some football in the yard, and I'll tackle his ass.
Tell me a little bit about how being an athlete or being a competitive athlete, like how that influences your approach to other things like Magic, perhaps.
So I grew up with a stern father, who my relationship with him now is significantly different than when I was a kid, for the better. But when I was growing up, he was a teacher, but he was also a coach, and he was regularly like our coach in sports. And since my brother and I were only one grade apart, I was born in May, which is like the end of the school year. He was born in October, which is like the beginning of the school year. We were only one grade apart, even though he had a significant edge on me physically. But I was really smart, and I figured out a lot of stuff, even in sports, where I could use my knowledge to my advantage in a number of ways. But just growing up in a household where you're just like always expected to be in an after school sport because otherwise I have to sit around for 2 hours while my dad coaches these teams or whatever. Instead, I chose to be a part of them and, try to outdo my brother. That was like the whole thing. Try to like make your dad proud. But I got that competitive spirit very early on from just competing with my brother and everything. And then at some point, sports became less of a priority for me, but I still had that like competitive spirit. And when I figured out that like Magic tournaments existed, I think I was in 10th grade, and I had all but stopped playing sports at that point, and I decided that I was just gonna play a bunch of Magic, and I started traveling with a buddy of mine, Blair Simpson, in Birmingham. He was actually like 25, and I was 16 or 17. And my mom at first was like, I don't know if you should be traveling long distances with a man who's 25 years old or whatever.
He's like a big brother. Yeah.
Yeah, but like he came over to the house and like my mom met him and he became, a friend of the family on top of all that. And so he was the best man at my wedding. I was the best man at his wedding a couple years ago. And ever since then, ever since I was 16, 17 years old, he's been the guy who drove me to all the tournaments, but keeping up the competitive spirit or whatever, it wasn't very difficult because playing in Magic tournaments is really fun.
Why did you drop from sports? Just got tired of it?
When I was in ninth grade, I had I wouldn't say a serious injury to my neck, but I had an injury to my neck.
That's always what happens.
It was very scary. And when I tried out for basketball that year, the injury was like still there. And I actually like had to warp my shot to have it not hurt when I was shooting because it was on like the side of my neck where I shot from. And so after that happened, I was like, well, my shot's ruined. Like, why? I don't want to play basketball anymore. I don't want to play football anymore because I don't want to break my neck. And then when I went to play baseball, I was still throwing with the same arm, and I had to start throwing sidearm, and it just was way worse. So
it's just having to overcompensate for that. Yeah, that's rough.
But I don't really feel that injury anymore. But it's like far too late for any of that stuff. But
okay,
that was basically why I quit playing sports. That and we bounced around between households quite a bit, and when I was in 10th grade, I bounced like back to my mom's instead of living with my dad. So the expectation to play sports dissipated. I still wanted to, and when I tried out, I couldn't or didn't. It wasn't like a comfortable feeling to throw a ball, and so I just kind of gave up.
Your dad being a coach, at the same school you're going to, did you feel some sort of pressure to perform at a certain level to please him?
Yeah, yes, of course. The thing that comes to mind immediately when I was in ninth grade, we just had gym class, but one day we were running the mile, right? And the mile, like, as a grown up, I know a mile's not very far, but when you're a kid, elementary school, middle school, high school, the 1 mile run is how you define.
Feels long.
It feels long, but it's also it defines how in shape you are or how just like physically able you are. And I remember when I was in as young as like 5th grade, I ran like an 8-minute mile, and I was like, oh man, this is so cool. I feel on top of the world. I'm like so strong and good and fast. 9th grade comes around. I'm not really like stoked about my living conditions. I think that at some point in the near future, I'm going to be like moving back to my mom's. And I was right. It just took like an extra year. But I remember one day he's the gym coach, and we're going to go outside and run the mile. And it's like first or second period of the day. It's cold outside, probably, 45, 50 degrees, and which is cold for Georgia. And, we're out there in gym shorts, kind of freezing my butt off, but it's like ideal crispiness conditions for running. And I remember I sprinted the entire mile that day, and I ran the fastest mile I ever ran, and I was never able to hit that marker again. I ran a 5:25 mile, and I was doing it for my dad as a big screw you, Dad, I want to go live with my mom, but I'm gonna show you that this is who I am or whatever. I remember that.
Show him that
vividly.
peak performance. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I remember I was like, it was like a big running track, and I just remembered I was in the inside lane, and I was just like, coming through. Like people are just walking in the middle lane. I'm like, get out of the way. I'm trying here. I'm like really trying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but as you said, right, your relationship with your dad has changed over time. So I can just visualize him as being like a coach that was like yelling at people, just kind of like an old school coach. Was that kind of thing, right? I don't know if that's fair to say or not.
So everyone loved my dad. They all called him Coach Mario because he had just like really dark hair, mustache, kind of looked Italian or whatever. If you saw a picture of him, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's Coach Mario. That wasn't his name. People just called him that after the Mario Brothers. But for everyone else, he was probably the best coach that they had. But for me, it was always like, when we get home, he's going to stress where I messed up or whatever, right? And so there was always like an extra layer of, you need to be better, you need to do better. but also he couldn't show us favoritism because we're his children, and if he shows us favoritism in any way, he gets
Right. That's kind of like the
roasted.
code of sports, is that if you're coaching your son or daughter, like you can't take it easy on them.
Right.
You can't show any like what's the word, like nepotism or like preference. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so,
So you have to go extra hard to criticize your children, basically.
right. And so, living with that was a little tough. But he wasn't just like a sports coach. He was also just the gym coach and the weight training coach or whatever. And so I had 1 to 2 classes with him every day. And also he was the coach for most of the teams I played for in ninth grade, which was like the football team. His office was right next to the head basketball coach's office. So even when we were doing basketball in ninth grade, he was there, and he was like the coach of the JV team, which I was also on. So there was just like, he was just always around, and I was always like expected to be at a certain level of performance. And even if he didn't say it, it was always implied. And if I ever like fell below the imaginary marker, I made myself feel like crap well before he ever made me feel like crap because of it. But that's just like not who he is anymore. Like, he's mostly retired. I think he works half days now. I went and visit him back during the summertime, and we were just like 2 bros hanging out because we don't have kids. And when you like grow up and become, I don't want to say I'm an expert in the field of Magic, but I feel like, maybe I'm pretty...
I'll say it. You are. Sure.
Okay. So when you reach that level in your field, and you're old enough where like your kids would be almost grown up by now if you had them when you were 18 or 20 years old, which most of the people in my family, when they have kids, that's the age that they're having them in. You don't have to answer to your parents anymore because they're getting to the like an old enough where they're going to have to start listening to you when you become like head of the household. Right.
Right.
And we're almost at that point, but neither of us want to say it. But when I visited, we just like sat around and played games and talked, and that was it. And I just got to ask him every question that I ever wanted to ask him when I was a kid. Nothing was off limits. And I asked him some like pretty intense stuff because I remembered a lot of stuff from when I was a kid that was like washed over, family drama, what happened in this situation with my mom, blah, blah, blah. And he was completely honest. And that was just like a new experience for me. And, ever since, we've just been like talking on the phone all the time, and it feels good.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's relatable, man. So my parents are separated, and I would definitely say my relationship with both of them has gotten better, and it's just gotten much more in perspective, I'll say, as I'm older. Because when you're younger, you're choosing sides, you see some part of the story or the picture, and you're also living your life as a kid, and it's just being young or being a kid is pretty tough. I would say in general, like, you're just dealing with a lot of stuff, and
yeah,
it's nice to like look back on it and not treat your parents as there being some sort of, like, just as people, like they're just people,
right?
As opposed to like some kind of power dynamic that I was dealing with when I was younger, kind of like,
Yeah.
like I felt like everything I said or did had consequences, and they really don't. But like at that moment, it just always feels like I could fuck up. I could always like, So I yeah, relatable, very much so. With my brother too, like it's gotten so much better over time.
Oh,
with
that's great.
My one sibling. So yeah.
Now the meeting as equals or whatever was a very strange experience because I had just never been able to talk to him like that in my past. But he was actually, it's funny. He actually got out like a lot of old pictures and stuff from when he was my age and younger. And he was heavily invested in not rec league baseball. What's the minor league baseball? He played a ton of minor league baseball and was like very close to getting drafted one time and was scouted a couple times when he was in high school. But he spent a lot of his 20s playing minor league baseball. And when I was telling him about the tournaments that I went to and the places that I went to play Magic and like winning tournaments and doing well and like, joining teams, having my picture taken or whatever, he was like seeing all this stuff and showing me, and he was just like, we're the same. Like And
Right, there's parallels.
Right,
Yeah.
but we kind of look the same. We definitely act the same, and our trajectories in our 20s was almost exactly the same. And so the only difference is he had a family with 3 kids or 4 kids.
Yeah.
And then, but I ended up like not having any kids myself. And but like it was just such a strange feeling, just like looking in looking at the
Surreal,
Dorian
right?
Gray picture or whatever, right?
Yeah,
Just-
yeah. Or as I like to say, like you just wake up one day and you're like, "Oh shit, I am actually my parents." Like I didn't know, but I just became my parents. Like that's just like inadvertently or whatever, or
Yeah.
genetically something, you know?
Mhm.
Tell me about a little bit about the whole SCG journey, right? Because that was such a big part of your life
Yeah, it was.
in your 20s for a big part of your life, and you're one of the most winningest SCG players of all time. And there you go. Yeah. So for those on the visual podcast, you can see all the trophies back there, and there's also a big card. Is that also something that you won, or?
So the big cards are the Catan, is that his name? Catan? The Catan of the Wild was one of the prizes for winning the state championships one year. The other one, the one you can see behind me on this side, if you're watching the visual, that's a big version of my Beast token, which was given to me as a thing from Star City Games. But even now, whenever they have one of their SCG cons, my token is something you can get from their prize wall, right?
I think I have one of your tokens somewhere.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm, look, Star City Games may have gone a different direction than I wanted them to in the last 3 years, but I think that market forces and world events that were out of their control have basically put them into a corner in terms of what they can afford and what they cannot. And I don't want to speak for them. I don't have that much inside information in terms of why they made the decisions they made, but I am incredibly thankful for the time I got to spend traveling and working for Star City. I started working for them in, I think it was 2008. I won the Alabama State Championships. I was playing Blue Black Fairies when it was in Standard, but it was like a fresh iteration, a big rotation. It just happened, and it was like Lorwyn plus Shards of Alara was the standard format. And so the removal spell went from being like Terror to Agony Warp. The counterspell went from Mana Leak to being like Essence Scatter or even Remove Soul. I can't remember exactly. So it was like, but it was Blue Black Fairies. Bitter Blossom, Thoughtseize was legal still.
That was also when the Gate came out, right? That was it with Shards, or am I misremembering?
The Gate? What'd you say?
Negate.
Oh, Negate.
As in the counter spell.
Yeah, maybe that was one of the first times Negate came out.
I probably wasn't a player back then, but anyways, yeah.
No, it's fine. But anyway, I played Blue Black Fairies. I won my state championship. It was the first time I won states, and I just remember that was like right about the time that Channel Fireball had started up, and they had poached a bunch of authors from Star City Games, and I just like contacted their contact page and was like, hey, I see that y'all have lost some writers. Like, I would love to audition. And I forgot, I think his name was Craig something. I don't remember the editor's name, but he said, yeah, send me your article. If I like it, we'll publish it and I'll give you $25. And I was like, deal. So I wrote my tournament report for winning states, wrote all about my new iteration of fairies, which I loved. And I got paid. I was a published author, baby. Let's go. Got my $25. Mm-hmm. And, but I literally spent the next, 2 years writing articles for Star City Games for $25 an article, which was not a lot at the time. And now it's like pennies or whatever. So bad. But it got my foot in the door and it got me interested in the game in a deeper way. In 2009, which was the year after I started writing for them, I ended up going to nationals that year, qualified on rating. I won a PTQ, went to a pro tour, and then at nationals I ended up making the top 3, and I beat Brad Nelson in the playoff, which he really dislikes, but I love. The other 2 players the top 3 was Charles Gindy, Adam Yurchik, and myself, and then Brad Nelson was number 4. And these were monumental names at the time. Yurchik and I had battled a couple times at Grand Prix. Gindi had recently won a Pro Tour with Elves like a year or two before. And Brad Nelson was player of the year that year. And so beating him was like a crowning achievement for me at the time. And so we end up going to Worlds. And I go to the World Championships on this team with Charles Gindi and Yurchik, and Brad's our alternate, but he's there to like play the event because he's qualified. And Yurchik and we come up with like some cool decks the couple weeks before the event. And my wife actually wins the Star City Open in Nashville, I think. Is it Knoxville or Nashville? With Mono Green Eldrazi Monument, which was the deck that I was working on, and I played in that same event, and she beat me in the top 8 and then won the tournament. But then our deck is just there for the world to see 1 week before Worlds, and I feel a little guilty about it, but also like I worked on the deck a lot, and I actually got the idea from former world champion Willie Edel out of South America. And I remember talking to him on Magic Online, and he's just like, I think this deck's pretty good. I'm like, I think it's pretty good too, because he had just beat my ass with it. And so, I do a lot of work on the list, get it nice and tuned. My wife wins the Open. The next week, everyone's ready for it. There's like Boros decks that are like main decking spoiled. Earthquake. Like there's like, plated Geopede, Step Links, Earthquake decks. Like that's just a deck that exists, and we cannot come close to beating that deck. But the kicker is Gindi is playing the green deck in the standard portion of Worlds, but he has this really weird interaction with a player that doesn't speak English, and Gindi just doesn't know how a card works. I think it was Caller of the Hunt. It like makes 2/2s every turn, and you can.
Oh, I remember this back in the day. Yeah.
Tap it to have all of your untapped wolves fight an opposing creature or whatever. And what ended up happening is that Gindi was just like, okay, do this thing. And then the guy's just like, I don't think you can do that. And he's just like, I'm pretty sure I can do that. They call a judge. The judge is like, you can't do that. And he's like, what do you want? What do you want from me, man? I thought I could do it. The card's complicated. If you want to DQ me for cheating, just DQ me for cheating. And the judge is like, okay. And just DQs him. But
I remember that back in the day with Gindi. Yes, when you said Gindi, the name like that Master of the Hunting came up in my mind. So
that's what happened at that Worlds, and because he got DQ'd, our Worlds was over, and from the team side of it, the team thing mattered a lot. There was like an actual 3v3 thing that you did, but also your overall record mattered. So him getting DQ'd meant that we were dead. And we couldn't even have Brad be our alternate because of reasons. They just gave some BS reason. But anyway, so after that, Star City was like, I guess you're better than we thought. How about we give you a raise up to $100 per article instead, so you don't go write for another website. And I gladly accepted because it was 4 times as much as I was making.
Yeah, it's all relative,
right?
At the time.
Yeah. But I slowly grew my name playing on the Star City Tour, the SCG Tour, and rode every week for, I don't know, like 13 years, man. And then when it all went kaput, it was really, really sad. But, I can't thank them enough for basically giving me a place to really stretch my legs and
you got a shot, right? You got a shot through them, and
now I'm having to do it on my own, but I don't have a boss anymore.
Now you're writing for your Patreon, is that right?
Yeah. My Patreon is where I post all my sideboard guides, talk about new decks and stuff. Mostly Pioneer, just because I think it's best to focus on one format when you play. When you make content, it's not best for the people who are competing because it's a rotating thing, but I strive to be a master of the things that I do, and it's
like do a few things well kind of deal,
right? And I pay attention to Modern a lot. I basically watch a stream all the time during the day. You
mentioned Spike and Doomwake and others, right?
Those are the two that I watch the most, and I just have them, like you said earlier, as the face on the other screen while I'm doing my work, while I'm writing my sideboard guides, while I'm working on Discord or in group chats or whatever. So I pay attention to the competitive formats, but Pioneer is the one that I enjoy the most, and so it's the one that I focus on the most.
What's it like writing for Patreon? Like, I don't want to ask about comparing it to SCG yet, but just writing for Patreon, it's a very hyper specialized audience that is literally paying you for a sideboard guide or something this weekend, right? So how does that influence your method? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Like, how does it work in your mind?
So not to get too deep into like trade secrets or whatever, but there's this huge ebb and flow when it comes to the Patreon pages, where if you're doing well in an event or you have something important to say, or your
demand goes up,
right, or you're, even if just the format that you play primarily is the spotlight format of the RCQ season or what have you, there's just like a natural wave that hits, and over the course of the month, that wave will slowly like pull back, and every single time that you make a piece of content, the wave goes back forward. And but it's just an ebb and flow, and it's been like that for the last year and a half or 2 years that I've been doing it, where whenever it's RCQ season for Pioneer, my number goes up, and whenever it's not RCQ season, the number goes down. But there are anomalies and there are spikes. Whenever I made the Rona combo deck at the beginning of this year, I had a 25% increase in subscribers in a month, which is insane. But it's also not sustainable, right? Like, those people came there for a specific deck, and so if you stop writing about that deck, they slowly dwindle over time. And at this point, I'm actually back down to about where I was before the Rona stuff. And so now it's just like, what's the next Rona? And it's scary. I'm living on the edge, but you compensate for that with sponsorships and with auxiliary methods of revenue. I've been doing a lot of commentary lately. I've been working with Apex Gaming out of Caldwell to help promote their events as well as commentate for them. I've grown like a close connection with their two owners, Kyle Huck and Taryn Huck. They've been, wonderful partners, but also just like treat Ross and I very well whenever we go and work for them. And so it makes it really easy to want to work for someone who does treat you like that. So working for Patreon as opposed to a published, like a public published site honestly is pretty similar. The majority of the time that I worked at Star City, I was behind a paywall, and now I'm still behind a paywall, but people are coming there just for me. And so they know what they're going to get. I promote my stuff on my social media all the time. Like, I say, hey, this is the deck I'm working on this week. If you're interested in this deck, just come give me $5, man. That's the deal. Like, every single day I do a thing, and if you want to give me $5 for that thing, you can have it. And that's the deal. And so I joke with my wife all the time that my entire life, and in a lot of ways, most of society these days is literally just, hey, you want to give me $5? Yeah, that's it.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just transactional. Like, I give you value, and it's a value exchange, right?
Right. And if people don't think that I'm giving them value on Patreon, then they speak with their wallet. But the majority of people, I think, will sign up for something like Patreon not with the intention to stay forever. Some people do. Those are obviously like the backbone of the industry, and those are the people that I care about, and I have known them for years now, and I appreciate their support immensely. But then the other 95% of people who subscribe to my Patreon are only there for a short period of time because I'm writing about the thing that they want to know about. And whether it's Pioneer in general, whether it's a specific deck, whatever, one sideboard guide, and it's funny because I can see every single time someone leaves, and I can see every single time someone comes back. And I learned all this because I kept track of people just by like saying, hey, thanks for signing up. But it keeps the messages, right? And so
so if they're repeating.
I had somebody one time, when they got to the third comeback, I was like, oh, this is just something that most people do. They just leave and come back whenever. And so I stopped sweating when people would leave, and I started saying, how can I get people to come back? And so it's literally just try to write something every week, try to stay as fresh in terms of the type of content you're creating. But then we get on 6-month stretches like we did during the summertime, where a new set comes out in April or May, and then you have Lord of the Rings come out for not your format, and then nothing else until August, September, October, there was a huge dead period for me, and it was hard. It's still pretty hard, but we've compensated.
Yeah. As an aside, thank goodness the One Ring is not in Pioneer. That would just be absolutely crazy.
Well, I wish that they would stop skipping Pioneer for releases. I think them making direct print stuff for older formats has literally been the reason why Standard died. And I think that Pioneer, it wasn't coming close to dying because people who like Pioneer really like Pioneer, myself included. But the direct to print stuff, skipping Pioneer, has been like harsh on the psyche. It's like, why do they get this like really cool thing that I don't get? Like when throughout Magic's history, it's been like, oh, every single thing has to pass the like standard pipeline test. And the Modern Horizons
because
stuff
insert arbitrary reason that Wizards concocted for why it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I
love it when they like make an announcement about a thing and then have to like roll back on it because of like public outcry, and it's like very
mental
obvious.
Gymnastics sometimes is crazy.
But like people, like for example, I was like, they should just ban the ring like right today or whatever. They should just ban it today. And someone was like, they can't ban it. They have to do it on this window that they created for themselves. And then I have to respond to them that they make the rules. They created the window. They can go back on it whenever they want.
They could say, today we changed the window. Yeah, I mean, it's all construct.
But that's kind of what they just did also with their more recent ban announcement. December 4th was the like planned announcement. But the week prior, they did the big reveal of like, hey, we're thinking about bans for these.
Which created a lot of anxiety among the player base.
It does, but it also is like a signal flare that times are about to get much better because they are more willing to be hands-on when it comes to format management. And what we see in formats like Pioneer or Commander, they actually have their own committee that decides on bans, unbans, things like that. And I think that the reason why there's nothing like that for like Pioneer, Modern, Standard is because they want to maintain full control over their formats that they use for a competitive play. And I wish in the future for them to create a committee of players to meet with them once a month to discuss these things in order to determine if there is a problem and what needs to be fixed. And I think it would be extremely healthy for them to have outsiders' perspective all the time, but also it would give the player base a feeling like they had a voice, and they could even like vote on who they want to represent them in the committee, right? It just seems like a no-brainer, and I hope
it
that
especially
they do.
makes sense because you said there's things that you can't just have a robot look at the data and figure it out, right? Especially on Magic Online.
They need more you need some sort of vibes-based bannings. That's what I say.
Because vibes. yeah.
The One Ring, horrible vibes, man. Get it out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're just touching on something like Magic players are never going to be satisfied with anything. So if you have a panel or people you consult with, there'll also be people coming up and saying like, oh, like what, who watches The Watchmen? Who watches Todd? If like who's Big Tobacco on Tandy? I don't know. Like, I don't know. I'm trying to use an American analogy here. There's pros and cons to all these things. It's just you just hope that there's smart enough people working within Wizards that are ex-players, that they know kind of what they're doing, and they have eye on the pulse or finger on the pulse, I think is the right
the group
analogy.
that they have right now is extremely good in terms of competitive play previously. It's like Dan Musser, Andrew Brown, Carmen Handy, Carmen Complarens, Jaden Complarens, Michael Majors, and they even got people.
That's a stacked team,
right? But they also have people that worked on like Modern Horizons 2, like Mason Clark. They had Aspiring Spike work on something one time. They have Brad Nelson and Brian Brown Dewin working on those types of side projects, pretty often, and so they are willing to interact with ex-players in terms of hires as well as contractors. And so I just wish that they would go one step further in terms of like asking like an elected group of players, like, what should we do? Is this a problem? And if it's not, great, let it lie, but there should be a meeting once a month between the players and WOTC that's like, hey, Fury's got to go, man. I'm sorry you made this awesome card that has been dumping on creature decks for 2 years, but it's time to go.
It's been a good ride, but yeah, it's time to fade off into the sunset, I think. Yeah. That's interesting because, like, you might have the smartest minds in this org of Wizards of the Coast, right? But you could be super smart, but you could still be a little bit out of touch just because you're not as tuned into playing Magic regularly and grinding events anymore. Like, it doesn't matter how smart you are. Like, if you're on the other side of that wall, you just can't get the full perspective, right?
So the culture at Wizards for 20 years was that players could not play, or employees could not play in Magic tournaments, no matter the stakes.
They have to only play unsanctioned or whatnot, yeah.
Right. And so what ended up happening is that there was an extremely large disconnect between the players and Wizards. Over the last 5 or 10 years, that culture has, slowly subsided. But I think that there's still an obvious lapse in, players of high caliber that are current versus players of high caliber who don't participate anymore, because they do still have rules in place where Wizards folks who are on the play design team or whatever aren't allowed to play in the 75K coming up in Chicago because the stakes are too high. And so because they have insider information about new sets well before they're released, and so they have a lot of experience with these cards that are just coming out or whatever. You can make up a million reasons why they can't be allowed to play or whatever for competitive integrity, and I would largely agree with you, but that just means that it's all the more important for them to consult outside of that circle in terms of bringing in people like Aspiring Spike, where they can just be honest with you about not just the strength of specific problems, but also just integrity of gameplay, how much fun they're having, how these new cards that just came out, how are you enjoying them? Are they having a significant impact on the format in what you would consider healthy ways? I would love to just have a conversation with them about unbanning stuff. I think that they could do the full-on nuclear reset button for Modern and just do no banless Modern, and you would come to a conclusion about probably 10 cards or whatever that just 100% have to stay banned. But I think that there's roughly 5 or 6 cards on the ban list right now that could come off.
A lot of safe unbans, I think.
Right. So the one that pops off, and this is all assuming that they don't ban anything coming up, right? Let's say that Beanstalk, Fury, Grief, the One Ring, these are all cards that stay in the format. I think you could unban Umezawa's Jitte. I'm sorry. I've played with that card a lot. The reason why it was broken is because Abrupt Decay didn't exist yet. And Kolaghan's Command, Prismari Command, these removal spells.
There are answers now.
Right. Yeah. There are answers that are also good in other situations. And when Jitte was a problem, the only way to kill it was to play your own Umezawa's Jitte, which was
legendary rule, that OG legendary.
Right. But it was funny because the card Naturalize existed, but it was unplayable because,
it's too narrow.
But nowadays that's just not the case anymore. Everyone has Boseiju in their deck or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm out here trying to play Mind Splice Apparatus in my fun rampy control deck or whatever, and people just have a land that blows up my powerful 4-mana card. And so, you know what? Jitte's fine, man. I'm sorry. It just is. And if anyone disagrees with me, then either they haven't been playing as long as me, haven't played with the card as much as I have, or they don't understand that the game is different now. And all of those things lead me to believe that we should just re-examine the ban list, because there's probably 5 other cards that can come off just as easily. That's it.
What's interesting, though, is that if I look at it from a company perspective, I always think about this, which is, what's the upside to taking any risk? If you unban anything, it might make certain players happy, but for the majority of people, it probably doesn't do all that much, other than the really entrenched people that wish something was unbanned. So it's it's a non-zero amount of risk. So it's just that, isn't that why they usually unban something as they ban something? Because it feels like a kind of equilibrium effect. Because if I'm Wizards, I'm just why rock the boat? Why even bother,
Okay, so I think the unbanning of Preordain is a great example that counters this argument, because Preordain and Ponder were both banned at the same time during the height of
since almost the beginning, right?
Yeah. They were banned at the height of Pioneer's blue-red dominance, where Storm and Splinter Twin, and I think there was even like some more other, kind of off the beaten path combo decks existed, and they were made more consistent by Ponder and Preordain. Over time, they ended up having to ban many of the cards that you were digging for and finding off of Ponder and Preordain, and so the banning of Ponder and Preordain started to mean less and less. And unbanning it, now we're getting to play with it in Modern again, and it's like pretty clear that it's good. People are playing it in Murktide, and people are putting it in decks with Underworld Breach in it, right? But it's not dominating, and it's not a problem. And it's because there's just 10 more years of context to add to the equation, and they just like haven't done that reassessment in quite some time, I think. And Ponder is another card that I wish I got to play with again. Green Sun Zenith's a card I wish I got to play with again. And anytime anyone brings up an issue that they have with it, I have a pretty easy counter. And the counter is that those cards are fun. And if you have to ban something because it's unfun, that's fine. But if you ban something because it's too powerful, or because you want to leave the deck intact while banning the thing that makes it more consistent, but then you end up having to ban the thing anyway, then why would you ever leave those two cards on the table when they're fun to play with? I'm sorry. You're right, though. Risk is a huge deal. Having to reban something that you unban is a huge PR nightmare. But at the end of the day, you have to just ask yourself, what is your ban philosophy? And if your ban philosophy is nothing should be banned unless it's problematic, then you have to like fine-tooth comb every single card. And if your ban philosophy is anything that's on the ban list stays because we don't want to rock the boat, or we don't want it to have it be a problem again, I just think that I don't want to say it's cowardly, but it's certainly disheartening, because Magic is just full of awesome, powerful synergies and powerful cards that, get banned from time to time. But, every now and then we get to open something back up that adds a lot of depth to some decks and opens up the format quite a bit. Just look at when they banned Bloodbraid Elf for a while, and they banned it because the Jund deck was too strong, and the reason why the Jund deck was too strong was because of Deathrite Shaman. And they banned Bloodbraid Elf instead of the Deathrite Shaman because they did not want to kill Jund, they wanted to weaken it. And so a month or two later, they end up banning the Deathrite Shaman again, and then a couple years later, they unban Bloodbraid Elf. But they do it at the same time that they unban Jace the Mind Sculptor, because historically Jace was fought very hard by Bloodbraid Elf because it was a double cast, it had haste, right? It was a natural counter. And so if you release two things at the same time that are like kind of natural counters to themselves, oftentimes they don't end up being a problem. And the way they approached Modern at the very beginning was a very heavy hand, and they banned some cards that were problematic in previous standard formats that didn't really have any litmus test to see whether or not they were too good for.
Because everything's contextual, right? So they were on the safe side. I get that, yeah.
Yeah, but they did that with Valakut, Bitter Blossom, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Stoneforge Mystic, a lot of other things. And over the last 5 years, or maybe longer, 9 years or so, they've been slowly unbanning things, and
these cards are more than fine now.
Right.
I mean, you've got the One Ring. Why worry about Jace the Mind Sculptor?
Exactly. So again, when they make a new thing that's too powerful, they have the option to unban stuff that might counteract it in some regard. But for the most part, I think they should just re-examine the whole ban list. And I just want someone in charge who has the cojones to actually do something like that, even if it's just run a no ban list league on Magic Online for 6 months and get enough data from people playing in those types of things to like reestablish what the ban list should be. Or consult with players,
as you said. Right.
Players aren't always going to be the most honest, truthful. They're going to have a lot of personal bias in the things that they enjoy.
Yeah, but it's like any survey. If you consult enough people, the honesty just naturally comes out at some point.
Yeah, or you're able to extrapolate a reasonable amount of information, and you just have to have somebody who's like able to parse the data, right? And if and in terms of the modern ban list, it is what it is. I just wish they were a little more lenient, I guess.
Yeah. I think what players want is really just consistency. Players want to feel like there's a governing body. It's kind of like sports, that there's like some sort of purity or some sort of consistency in the way things are managed, things are ruled, right? That's all we want, really.
Yeah.
It's just be consistent. Like if you make one decision here to ban something, it should be the same rationale as another decision to ban something or to unban something. There needs to be, as you said, a philosophy, right? That's what it is.
Yeah, and for a long time,
Policy.
people mentioned the like turn 4 kill. That was like if anything kills before turn 3 in modern, it's like a potential problem. That was like something that they had in a pseudo mission statement in like 2013 or 2012 or something, and people have basically recalled back upon that on social media whenever people are discussing ban philosophy. And at some point, that was no longer the case. Turn 4 kills were not necessarily okay. Turn 3 kills were not necessarily off the table. Turn 2 kills aren't even necessarily off the table. It's more so about vibes. It is. It's just like, do people hate this card in combo? If yes,
some sort of
delete.
Intangible fun factor kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and look, fun's different for everyone, but in terms of competitive viability, you often will see decks that can kill your opponent in one extreme way, and then occasionally win in 2 or 3 other ways. And whenever they win the game in their extreme way, it is often well before normal games would end. Like it's usually a turn or 2 earlier than it really should end. Or the combo functions in such a way that it is insulated from interaction, or insulated from roughly 70% of the interaction available in the format. And when that ends up being the case, it often, people say, oh, I didn't have fun, or like this is an unfun interaction. That's what they mean. It's just, it feels like it's happening too quickly, and it feels like it's too hard to do anything about it. That doesn't mean it's impossible. That doesn't mean that the win rate's too high. It's just vibes.
Right. Or there's a way to break down vibes and fun in a kind of framework for why that is problematic, or not fun, or not vibesy. Is that even a word? I want to actually talk a bit about casting, because
sure.
As you just mentioned, you've been doing Apex Gaming. You've been doing there you go. You've been doing that. Is that the only gig you have right now? I mean, I guess streaming is a kind of casting, but it's not really. I mean, it's talking about your own place. But is Apex the main one for you and Ross?
So it's the main one for me and Ross. We've been going there basically once every 2 months for about 2 years now, and I have really enjoyed working with them. They have an A-class setup in terms of like a studio, recording space, the tech to go with it, and they put on a good broadcast because Taryn Huck is just great at managing stream stuff. He even recently got a job. He's like head of the AV department at a local school now, because that's just like stuff he likes doing and he's good at it. I'm actually have recently been tapped to be on coverage of the regional championship in the United States in Atlanta coming up. I'll be casting from home in this very room, but I will be doing that alongside some really great casters. Anurag Das, AnzidMTG, he's the person,
he's the mastermind behind it, yeah.
Right. But he tapped me to do it. I reached out to him a while back and was like, hey, this tournament's coming up. I'm highly motivated, and this is the format that I know the most. So I did actually work with him earlier in the year. I did a standard event back in like March or April. One of the regional championships in San Diego was standard, and I was on commentary for that as well. So I enjoy working with them. That group's great. Jeff Foster works behind the scenes a lot. They have another teammate who's goes by the Biscuit Jesus. But
yeah, Biscuit Jesus, I know him. Yeah.
So that team is awesome. I really enjoy working with them too, and I'm looking forward to doing RC Atlanta coverage. My teammate this time is Marcus Luong. He's a newcomer. We actually haven't even.
Oh, I know Marcus. Yeah. He's been a grinder for a while.
Yeah, but we haven't figured out our roles yet in terms of like who's A, who's B.
Who's color and who's play-by-play?
Right.
Yeah.
And when I'm with Ross at Apex, I'm play by play. But when I do most other things, I'm color, because you pick somebody to do color who knows all about the thing that you're doing. And in Pioneer specifically, I think I would be great at color because I get to explain the whys behind everything. But I've just been, the play by play at Apex for the last 2 years. So it's like, it's hard to jump back and forth.
It is like you have to rework that muscle. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
You have to let someone else lead. It's like dancing.
Of course, yeah. You've been doing commentary since the SCG days, right?
Yeah, I was on and off commentator handful of times between like 2013, 2016, 2017. Basically, if I was like not in day 2 of the 2-day event, or someone got sick or whatever, they would ask me to like fill in if someone couldn't, or if there were travel problems, occasionally they'd ask me to step in for. I think I stepped in for Jerry Thompson one time. I stepped in for Cedric a couple times. Over the years, accidents happen. People get their flights canceled. They get all their bags lost or whatever. And so like, they just like can't. And I was always very happy to step into the booth because ultimately that's what I wanted to do. I tried.
You wanted to do that more than being a player, perhaps, or
at some point, the grind starts to kill you, man. I don't know what else to tell you. You travel every other weekend for, 10 straight years, 8 straight years or whatever, playing tournaments. Every time you lose, it makes you feel like shit. Every time you win, it feels good, but like, it doesn't feel that good. It just feels good.
It's a fleeting moment, right?
Right. And you kind of like use those wins to springboard you into another field, or to try to leverage it for like long-term revenue generation. And when I'm already like moving into being a streamer and trying to like make YouTube videos and content like that, then it's like pretty obvious that the next step is to stop physically playing in the events and instead do things that surround the event to promote it or to cast it. And because of my extensive knowledge of the game in general, I felt like casting was like a natural fit, and I liked doing it. I liked doing it all the times that I got to like step in. And so around, I think it was either 2017 or 2018, I asked Cedric if I could move to a more full-time commentary position, and he was in charge of the stable at the time for Star City Games. And he paired me up with Ryan Overturf pretty early on. And him and I were casting partners for like 2 years, and I loved it. And it felt bad when I would miss the invitationals, but it felt great basically any other time I was casting, because I was like guaranteed top 4 in terms of like the prizing or whatever. It was just like a top 4 split was always about the same as what I would get for doing commentary. And the top 4 split was like very common when you would top 4. And so... Sure. Yeah, of course I'll take a guaranteed top 4 split, and instead of the stress of having to win and the disappointment of losing, I just get to basically stretch my legs and relax and just talk about Magic for 2 days straight. Yeah, it's stressful as shit, but it's nothing compared to just the pain of having a bad month when a lot of your
having a down month.
Yeah, and that happened all the time. And now though, it's like, okay, I never have a down month except when content is like on a slump or whatever. But a lot of that is up to me, but not all of it. And so I try to always control the things that I can control, and I try not to sweat too badly the things that I can't control.
How do you think you've leveled up or evolved as a commentator? If you compare yourself to those early days when you were a walk-on versus now doing the Apex events?
As a walk-on, I asserted dominance over the players that were in the feature match area. And now I defend them with all of my heart. Someone will make a misplay, and you'll just see Twitch chat go, minus 3 points Keck W or whatever. Like, they just like go crazy about someone who like missed an attack or missequenced their land or whatever. And I come back to the booth. Let's have a chat. It's like, leave them alone, okay? If I watched you play any match of Magic, I could probably find 2 game rules violations, 3 missed triggers, and maybe you accidentally cheated one time or whatever, right? Like, just
It's a hard game.
right. It's an extremely difficult game, and even some of the best players that we have playing at Apex, right? They'll have like a minor mistake on camera that we have to like pause them for, and we are aggressive about pausing the matches to maintain the integrity of the game state, because once they reach a certain point, it's usually like one full turn cycle. If one full turn cycle goes by, they really can't fix whatever happened. And it's an extremely dissatisfying experience as a viewer to see something that you clearly know and that the commentators clearly know is a mistake. And then the judge comes over and they say, well, it's too late to fix because 4 decisions have been made since then. And so we're just like creating a culture that's just like very aggressive about fixing things, making sure that the people at home understand that accidents do not mean that they are cheating. Cheating specifically implies like intent to do something wrong on purpose. And so, you know, I just try to be very clear when I talk to the people at home, you know, like, this is what's happening. This is what's probably going to be the fix, but we're going to let the judge figure it out. And when I was younger, I was mean. And I have grown
because you were in the position of a player yourself, right? So.
Right. And I have high expectations of myself. And so I have high expectations of my fellow competitors. And when I was in the booth early on, I was aggressive and relentless about those types of mistakes. And someone who I actually liked ended up blocking me on social media because of something that I said on coverage about them, because they got a game loss for marked cards with double face sleeves. And when it happened, I just started laughing. I was like, this is the 3rd time we've had double face cards. You should know better. This is your fault, right? But like, I did it in like kind of a mean way. And that's just like not something I would do anymore. I empathize, because there's like too many cards, too many rules, too many formats. Cards are too expensive. Give them a break. And so that's what I try to do. Just take everything.
And they're playing on camera. There's some pressure to that as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're playing on camera in an era where camera matches are not regular. Even the bigger events from, you know, Star City Games has their SCG cons every month or two. And like, they don't broadcast them anymore. The people who broadcast them are doing it on their own dime, and they're picking their own little feature matches and stuff. And so like, there's not this culture of like, try to catch a cheater anymore. Like, that just doesn't exist. And it's actually so lax that Ross and I have conversations regularly where we're just like, we have to explain to them that if they're not careful, there's going to be a wolf in their midst soon, and that wolf is going to take everything from them, because they did that to us. And we were, even then, we were vigilant about it. We would cut each other's decks. We would present in such a way where it was like very obvious that we weren't trying to manipulate, not trying to cheat. We would turn our head while we were shuffling cards to ensure that there was
out of your way to
right. And that culture doesn't exist anymore. And it's partly because
all it takes is one wolf or bad actor.
Right. And but we're just getting to the point where tournaments are coming back that are like worth enough, where people will be willing to cheat because the prizes are big enough. And from playing a bunch of video games in my life and playing online through the majority of it, I'll say that people will cheat for $0. And so when you put a $100,000 cash prize up, people will cheat in order to attain it, because they know that they're not good enough to get there without it. And what ends up happening a lot of times is players who are very good at the game naturally will cheat to accrue an extra 10% equity. And this was actually a very common thing to happen during like the 2010s, where we had people getting banned who were like winning. I think Fabrizio and Terry won like 5 Grand Prix in a row or something. And at that point, it's like, okay, man, like, you know, one or 2 Grand Prix in a row, you know, sure, 3, come on, but 5, something's a little fishy. And then of course, you know, he was just doing a million little things to gain micro edges and whatever. But I digress. Mostly just the culture at this point is very favorable for cheaters, and I need a governing body to enforce bans, and they don't have anything of that nature anymore in Magic the Gathering, and it's terrifying.
Player bans, right? Penalties,
right? And so like, someone can get disqualified from a tournament, but they can just go to another store the next day and play a tournament. There's no punishment.
Or if someone gets banned from Apex, they just go to NRG or some other place in the States or whatnot.
Right. But there's no central organized body anymore. The DCI is gone. The judge program is not affiliated with Wizards of the Coast in any capacity anymore. And I'm just hoping that at some point the dam breaks and they realize that they need to create infrastructure to protect their players and the integrity of their events. And but that's something that I've been I've talked about a lot with the organizers I've worked with, including folks at Apex Gaming, to try to cultivate the culture of always be cutting your opponent's decks or shuffling your opponent's decks while they're codified into the rules. People don't care, man. They just tap the deck and move on with their life. And like, I get it, because it's annoying in Modern specifically to cut your opponent's deck or shuffle your opponent's deck 5 times a game when they're playing.
Gotta stay vigilant, man. The shuffle cheats are the easiest to pull off.
Exactly.
Easiest.
Exactly. So
yeah.
So just that's the type of thing. Whenever I'm doing commentary nowadays, I'm just extremely lenient on mistakes, but we need to be hyper vigilant about the mechanical cheats that that we know, and the cheats of opportunity. And I just hope that at some point we just get another governing body in place to enforce those rules to a degree that multiple stores across the country or the world can like share that type of a ban list or whatever. It's just it not existing is a travesty.
So I know you mentioned like having a stronger sense of empathy as a caster or commentator, but are there other things like just as a person? Sure, that leads into what you're doing, but are there other things like how you communicate on camera, or like how you interact with your co-host, or how you even prepare for events, or other things? Like, are there other parts of it that you've also leveled up in?
So my preparation for events is roughly the same. Just play tons of games, watch tons of games, talk to people who are...
Know the format.
Right.
Okay.
Talk to people who are smarter than you and learn from them. As far as in the booth working with Ross, since I'm usually primary, I just call the plays and then I softball him all the time so he can like set it up and knock it down. I was never on that side when we were doing on SCG, and so developing that skill has taken some time, but I think I finally caught my stride. In terms of what I do differently, it's not a lot from when I was playing all the time, because I still just play all the time. It's just I don't play in the big tournaments or whatever. I just play at home.
But it seems like having knowledge of the format is absolutely critical, right, for your role, because like you can definitely tell when commentators don't know a format versus knowing a format. It really shows, I think. It
even shows whenever like a new card comes out and there's like a 2-card interaction that if you'd played the deck before, like you would know that was a thing. And it comes up every now and then. Even for me, like when I'll be talking about Modern, there's like someone played Tishana's Tidebinder at the Invitational recently, and this is like a brand new card that I had not seen anyone cast yet. But it just like turns on Flame of Anor, and now every single Rhinos deck is just playing Tishana's Tidebinder and Flame of Anor. But like that happened the Friday before the Invitational on Magic Online when the set had been out less than a week. And so like in order for me to...
You can't know all the interactions, it's challenging.
But I did, right? Because I paid attention to the results on Twitter the night before, and I saw the deck that won, and I saw that
you're on the pulse.
Right. And so that's what I am now. I'm just always sitting on the cutting edge. And
that's when you deliver value for the Twitch viewers, because then you explain it to them. That's what it is, because they don't know.
Yeah, so sometimes I'll know an interaction and I'll just ask Ross about it because he's able to explain it.
Softball, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But that's also the type of thing where like I can cover my own tracks, where if there is a thing that I don't know, I can do the same
One
thing.
of you has to be able to answer. You can't have a question that none of you can answer. That would be bad. Yeah.
We don't have those too often. Good. Every now and then on coverage, though, not to sidetrack or whatever, but there's like cards that come up that are like arts that we've never seen before, and we just don't know what a card is, so we're just like, I think that's a polluted delta, but actually no, sorry, it's a
Yeah.
dark slick shores. They tapped it for mana. Oh, actually it is a polluted delta. There's an
Right,
herb
right,
organ
right.
play.
That's the problem with the game itself and all the different arts.
Yeah.
It's like it's crazy actually. I don't
is.
nobody can really figure that stuff out.
There,
Like when
there
you
are
have that
people.
new
I have discovered that there are people whose their entire job is to know what those things are, and if they were casters, they would have more extensive knowledge or whatever. But in order for me to have the capacity to talk about the game at a high level, I cannot just know every art on every card.
Right,
I can barely
right.
know every card, and I don't know every card. It's almost impossible.
It's hard enough knowing what the cards do, let
Right.
alone all the different printings of the cards. I get you. Yeah. Something you said, which is that it's kind of the flip side of honesty, because I feel like that's something that's always been very much a part of you and what you do, which I admire, which is like you're just pretty honest all the time. Like I just don't think there's really a filter. Like I've seen you stream where you're like singing, and I've seen you like do different things at various points over the years, and you just kind of like tell it as it is. Sometimes it rubs off on people the wrong way. I don't want to call you abrasive exactly, but you have had someone block you because you're just kind of saying like, why'd you do that? But I mean, have you felt like, obviously that's you, Todd Anderson is Todd Anderson, but like has this ever conflicted with like opportunities or like things that may have happened for you or not happened to you because of who you are?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I have lost business opportunities because of the things I have said in defense of what I consider to be the greater good. And most explicitly, I think my relationship with Wizards of the Coast has basically been non-existent or
So you kind of burned some bridges there. That's what you're saying.
look, I maybe burned bridges with people 10 years ago, but now all the people at work there are like old friends of mine or whatever. So it's like the new guard knows who I am and knows what I'm about. But they also understand that like I'm not necessarily the type of person that they need to ask for like my opinion on everything, because my opinion is not necessarily right, but I am certainly going to be vocal about it. And but that's the thing too, is that I'm also willing to listen and learn and like change my opinion if I think someone makes a really good argument. And I actually had like a really weird interaction with somebody about a magic card like 6 months ago, and I was like, I think this card's probably too good to unban. And then they like listed off a few things, and I was like, oh, actually that's a good point. And then someone responded with, oh, so your original post is just wrong now? And I'm like, yeah, that's what happens when two humans.
Oh my god, someone admitted they're wrong on the internet.
Right. It's like the culture doesn't exist anymore where two people have a conversation and one person is swayed. What ends up happening is that two people of opposing ideologies butt heads, and everyone watching is either already in a camp or they're in the middle, and
They're already on that team.
And the people that are in the middle will gravitate towards whatever one is saying the things that they agree with more. But that's every argument for every issue that exists on the planet. And the way that social media is constructed. Now, in terms of brutal honesty, that is my brand. I am unequivocally unapologetic. I am honest about what I think to the best of my ability, in such a way where I try not to make people upset, but I'll say what I think about a thing, because I feel like too many interactions between humans are muddied by niceties, and for lack of a better, people just don't really say what they mean because they're afraid of the consequences of what they say in terms of financial, social consequences. And growing up, I was always like that. I would talk back to my teachers when I thought that they were wrong, and I was often right on some of the stuff, not even like subjective stuff, but like objectively true things from the material we were reading.
Facts kind of thing.
Right.
Sure.
And so that's just kind of who I've always been. I was extremely emotional all the time as a younger person too, where even in my writing, I would often write stories about my experiences, and I would say these things about certain people that rubbed me the wrong way, and then that bridge was burned, right? But those people oftentimes would just end up being people we excommunicated from the group anyway because of the horrible things that they said, right? I say things that might piss you off, but those people are doing things that like ruin people's lives. And like,
Right.
you know, people tell me to shut up, or they tell me like, hey, don't talk bad about this person or whatever. I'm just like, I saw them do something that was bad and we should be done with them, right?
Hmm.
And so, you know, over time these people slowly got taken out or whatever, but I don't know. Long story short, I apologize for nothing, but I have definitely burned some bridges. And whether it's people from Wizards of the Coast or other organizations, you know, I don't want to get too much into it, but we'll just say that I tell it like it is.
Yeah. I think there's also a side of it, which is that as you become more and more known as a Magic player or a Magic personality, there's just always going to be people that are out to get you. I'm kind of learning that. I'm a much smaller scale than you are because I don't do Magic strategy and things like that. But I have felt that sometimes. It's just like you're going to have people that will come after you. They just don't like your face. They just don't like your voice or whatever,
Yeah.
right? You just rub them the wrong way, and it's like it's okay. Not everything is for everybody. I mean, it's kind of like you just kind of have to. I guess the question here is you do you just are did you develop like thicker skin over time, or is that just always the way it's been? Like this is nothing compared to like when you were being coached by your dad, or like when you were a magic grinder or something like that.
All right. So, uh, some of the people who are listening to this will likely remember a time where they themselves did not like me. And over time, I think I wear people down just through just they see over time that I have enough correct takes and I'm on the right side
uh
of more issues and I am on the right side of the issue early and aggressively. And then at some point someone's like,
and consistent in that, by the way.
right. And
Yeah.
when I'm on the wrong side, I get swayed very quickly by my peers. When I listen to them, when they tell me why the thing is why it is, I get pulled in the right direction, and I'm open to it. And I think that in general will just make people not really interested in you as a person, and they're more so interested in like what you represent. And when someone is combative in such a way, uh, always for what they think is the greater good, you're just going to have a lot of instances where you butt heads with somebody on an issue. And for some people, those issues are hard line. And for others, you know, it's a lot more nebulous. But at the same time, like if you hear enough people say, oh, Todd Anderson is kind of a jerk, you know, he said this one thing, but then 6 months later, it's like, oh, well, he was just right. You know, you start to see that over time. It's like, okay, maybe there's something to this dude. Um,
Yeah, there's a body of work, right, that proves itself over time.
the one of the very first things I ever wrote for Star City Games was an article on Legacy. And I had not really played that much Legacy leading up to writing that article. It was like here is my first foray into this iteration of Legacy, my first foray into Legacy in the last 5 years. Here are my thoughts. This was in like 2009. There was an SCG in Atlanta, and Show and Tell was very popular in the Reanimator decks. It was like Reanimator, a bunch of blue combo, and Mystical Tutor, the one blue tutor that went and got a instant or sorcerer or whatever, was like everywhere, and it was banned shortly after. But at that event, I just borrowed a deck to play. It was my friend's Goblin deck, and I got smushed by combo over and over again because my deck just didn't have the tools to interact with combo. And in my article that I wrote, I said, you know, Legacy is a place where you must play Force of Will or you'll lose. And I received so much just venom from one website in particular. It was called mtgthesource.com, and they made threads about me and my family for years, just shitting on me because of this like one Legacy article I wrote when I was, you know, 20 years old or 22 years old or whatever. And also like from the perspective of someone who doesn't play Legacy a lot. Fast forward 2 years, and then like the majority of these trophies are Legacy, and the majority of decks that I won with have Force of Will in them. So scoreboard, you chuds, eat shit.
People get very attached to, and I'll speak as someone who was on MTG The Source, because I used to be really into Legacy, and I know that for a very long time it was very unhealthy. It defined my identity as a Magic player, which is really sad to say in retrospect. But like, people have these ideals about a format, and they feel like they're a format specialist, which by the way is really not a thing. You should not be proud of that. So you should go play some Limited and actually learn how combat math works. Anyways, but yeah, it's like people get very defensive about the sanctity of a format, and they will push out people that threaten their core beliefs about a format. Like, so you could actually be right in that statement, but that's not going to matter. I think they did the same to a Mr. Hoogland when he wrote some sort of article on Legacy back in the day. Like, MTG The Source just I would say actually pretty unfairly just like attacked what he had to say, but he was a winning player. Like, despite how I feel about you or Jeff or somebody personality wise, like, you have to divorce the ideas of a player from who they are and their brand. And if you have good opinions, you have good opinions.
James, it's way more fun to dogpile. It's just a lot of fun to
it's just so much more fun
to ruin someone's day.
I've been dogpiled this year, you know? So I've just turned around. Like, I used to be the dogpiler, now I'm the dogpiled, and now I'm just like,
look. But after you get dogpiled once, you realize, hey, maybe this isn't so good or nice.
Yeah, like, maybe there's an actual human that you're attacking, and it's not all fun and games and keyboard stuff. So, yeah. You know that better than I do, to a much greater extent. So I'm preaching to the choir here, but
I wouldn't say that I have been particularly aggressed upon by the community. I think that there are a handful of people over the years who would say something really mean or negative about me or my family, and I would just challenge them openly, publicly, even privately. Like, hey, you don't know me. Like, whatever you think you know about me is wrong, and I can prove it to you however you like. And a lot of times I would just like, why don't we go grab a beer, dude? Or why don't you ask this person who's a mutual friend of ours what they think about me? And the moment that they do, their tune changes, because all they see of me is me at my most explosive or energetic or aggressive or angry, right? Or me at the height of my career, like winning tournaments and just like being the cockiest SOB on the planet, right? Like, how can you contain someone who doesn't lose? And how can you preach to somebody that they're wrong about a certain thing when they continuously prove that they're right over and over again? And so you end up getting like a lot of younger kids these days who are winning a bunch, and no one beats them. And because of that, they just act like assholes. But no one can tell them differently because they don't lose.
They haven't tasted defeat yet,
right?
So they haven't had that humble pie yet,
right?
So
and
it'll come, but
hopefully it'll come, but we'll see. But I do want to specifically call out one person as being the antithesis of this, and that is former world champion Nathan Steuer, who recently had his 21st birthday party at the Apex house, and we had like a really good time. And I got to talk to him a bunch over the last couple months when he joined our Lorcana Invitational. And he is a younger player who doesn't lose very much, who is extremely humble. He's definitely just a student of the game who just wants to get better. And he just surrounds himself with like-minded people who also just like are respectful and intelligent and they're just like healthy ambassadors for the game. And
he's a chill dude, man. I had him on Humans of Magic. I interviewed him for like over an hour, and it's just like he's just so much more mature than anyone in his age group that I've ever encountered, like Magic or otherwise.
Yeah,
it's just he's got a solid head.
Far
on his
more
shoulders.
than me when I was his age, for sure.
Far more than anybody, myself included. I could barely talk at that age, let alone like win Magic tournaments. It's just or win the highest tier Magic tournaments in the world. Like, he is probably one of the best Magic players right now. Like, just
Easily,
there's
yeah.
almost no debate. Maybe the best right now. So just huge, amazing run the last year, 2 years. Um, I want to talk a little bit about legacy, not the legacy format, but your legacy, because I think that you are actually quite underappreciated as one of the deck building greats in the game.
Aw.
I would say that you have done a lot of seminal work in the I think it was, whether it was with Mono Blue Illusions in 2011, 2012, or otherwise, like, and even now with Pioneer and different things, right? I feel like you may not get enough credit as one of the greats. I think you could be in the top 10 or the top 15 of that list. How do you feel about that? I mean, it's kind of weird to have someone just ask you,
Okay.
like how do you feel about being one of the greats? Like, but you know, like, how, like, is that something that you set out to do? Is that just naturally comes about as being out of being a player, just being a student of the game? Like, how do you think about maybe your legacy from that standpoint?
It's extremely difficult to answer this question without sounding like I'm just completely full of myself. So,
It's okay. I'll give you license to do because I
Okay.
asked the question.
let's
So, yeah.
let's assume that I'm humble, and then I'll say some stuff. I won my first PTQ in 2006. I took a deck that top four the Pro Tour, and I tweaked it by 8 cards, and the 8 changes I made are directly responsible for my win in the PTQ. And at that point, I realized that whatever people thought was common knowledge is not necessarily correct for your local metagame. And ever since then, I've always looked for an edge in whatever competitive format that I'm working on. And I work on that format for as long as there are tournaments in that format. And then the seasons would change, and I would move on to the next one, whether it's standard, modern, pioneer, whatever. Fast forward to 2009, the mono green deck with Eldrazi Monument just like shit on a tournament, defined the world's metagame. Everyone who played that deck, thought it was awesome, but at the event it was heavily metagamed against, and it got shit on, and so it was kind of lost to time, and because the format changed like a week later after Worlds or whatever. Then when I moved to Roanoke in 2011, I started working with Brad Nelson, Jerry Thompson, Tom the Boss Ross, other people, and their accolades were always greater than my own, and so I existed in their shadows. But many of the things that we were successful with deck-wise were a collaboration between us. And most of the time when they did well with my work, I didn't take credit for it. Why would I steal my friend's thunder? But like Brad Nelson, myself, and Brian Brown doing all top 8 at Grand Prix Louisville with Mono Black Devotion. That deck was in the top 8 of the Pro Tour the previous week, but it lost in top 8 and people thought it was bad. And I figured out that like Pack Rat was actually really good. I didn't want to overload on them, so we only played 2. Me and BBD and Brad, they were actually traveling back from the Pro Tour while I was doing the bulk of the playtesting for the Grand Prix, because I wasn't at the Pro Tour the week before, but they were. And when they got home, I just had a deck for them, and we all 3 top 8'd and Brian won. And now Brian is like known for that deck, and that was my deck. And then all throughout the next few years, like I worked on Blue White Delver with basically nobody. I started just playing with Mono Blue Illusions. I like top forward on the opening weekend of SCG Indianapolis in like 2011 or 2012. I forgot which year exactly. But then I just wrote the Delver Compendium volumes 1 through 5 as my articles for the next month about this deck. And then ultimately Charles Gindy played a version that won an open, and then he got all the credit for it or whatever. And then I built Mono Green Dungrove Elder, if you recall that deck, and I ended up top 8ing an open with it, did well, whatever, right? But as we continue this trend of playing on the SCG Tour every week, like I had a lot of successes, obviously, but my friends also had a lot of success too, and often it was with my ideas and my decks. And instead of like taking that credit from them, I let us all bask in our glories together because we're a group. But over time, I just only played the SCG Tour, and they all played the Pro Tour, and they played Worlds, and so like their names were bigger than mine. And you look like such a huge piece of shit if you interject on someone else's win with, "Hey, that's my deck." Right? You just look like the cockiest, worst friend imaginable. And so I never did. I tried not to. The one thing that I wish I got credit for, there was a block constructed Pro Tour. Do you remember Godinis Vidugoris? Do you remember that person? Is that a name you remember? So Go, everyone called him Go, but Godinis top 2'd a Pro Tour with a deck that I built. And I got no credit, and Sam Black got all the credit for it because Jerry Thompson had gifted them a playtest deck of ours that he liked as like a friend showing, and then Go played the deck and made it to the finals, and I got nothing. And Sam got the credit for that. Sam got the credit for a lot of decks, and he built most of them, but that one was one that I built, and I didn't get any credit for, and I was kind of upset about it. But that type of thing just happened a lot because if I say anything, the public perception is that I'm like jealous or, just only out for myself or whatever. And so holding back forever, you just stop caring so much about what you represent in the long term, and you more so care about what you represent in the now. And in the now, I had to maintain the integrity of my own brand, and I had to ensure my own prosperity in the industry by keeping connections that were close to me, never rocking the boat, never making a stink about anything, and just like always trying to just be the best. And that's what I did. But, moving on to like later in the 2010s or whatever, people would move to Roanoke like Tom Ross, and he got all the credit for Infect, which rightfully so. But there was a 6-month stretch where I had as much or more success with Infect than him, and the majority of the changes were collaborative. And oftentimes my changes were better than, and he would play a slightly different list because he would change 2 cards the night before for no reason. He would just say, I just like this card instead. And then he doesn't do well in that event, but then he wins the next one or whatever. And, little things like that happened all the time. BBD played a lot with, like Stoneforge Mystic in the early days of our PTQ grinding or whatever. And he won like one of his PTQs, beating me like in the finals of a PTQ in Roanoke. And then that season, he won Worlds. But if I won that match where I don't mulligan to 5 in the finals, right? Maybe I don't get to Worlds, but I definitely get on an extra Pro Tour. And I never played 4 Pro Tours in a row in my entire career. It was always like 1 point short here, 2 points short there. You don't quite hit the gold, or they changed silver or gold by 1 point, and so now you missed this year, whereas you would have hit last year. The rewards always got scaled back, always were being scaled more and more back, and they always made the thresholds harder and harder to attain. Whereas the people who would hit those thresholds, they would be gifted with a full cycle extra to try to maintain being on the train. And it was not very hard to maintain being on the train when you get 4 tries. But when you only have 1 try, breaking through is extremely difficult. And maintaining that lifestyle is also extremely difficult and expensive because you're just jet setting around the freaking world. And I'm poor, man. I grew up poor. I still don't have like tons of money or whatever. Like my wife has a stable job. I have a quasi-stable job. But things are scary sometimes. Like $2,000 water heater a couple months ago, like that's scary. That sucks, right? Little things like that. And so I don't care so much about my legacy in the game because I know what I did. And if anyone ever wants to ask me about it, I'll give them the full story. And you want to ask me about it, I'm giving you as much of the story as I think, really pertains to the situation. And I would love to be known in history as like someone who, came up with the goggles deck, but in reality, that was Jerry and I coming up with it together. And I think that the majority of decks in Magic are 2+ people collaborating and then one person getting most of the royalties, for lack of a better, in terms of like who built the deck, because they're the person that did well with it. And ever since I became like a full-time streamer or semi full-time streamer, however you want to classify me, I stopped playing the bigger events. And so the people who play a lot, who do play the big events, they don't really look at me as a threat. And so the things that I say don't really hold weight with them. But what I am able to do is build new decks that like function in terms of like pure ideology. And then other people take those ideas and iterate upon them and then use them to win events. And the people that are below that level, right? Those are usually the people who are coming to me on my Patreon, like looking for sideboard guides for FNM and looking for cool new strategies for Pioneer because they just enjoy playing the game. And those are the people that I enjoy talking to, well, way more than people who like, are way smarter than me or whatever, because the people who are way smarter than me don't really give a shit what I have to say. But the people that are like coming to me for help, winning their RCQ, those are the people that I really enjoy engaging with. And those are the people who I think do offer the respect in terms of like what my legacy in Magic is really about. And I do appreciate them quite a bit.
I'll tell you what, Todd, as I was asking the question, I knew that it's just a challenging thing because the whole concept of deck creator and attribution and someone winning with a deck versus contributing to a deck, even things like you said, like when Willie told you about Eldrazi Monument, like, does that credit belong to him? Does it belong to the person who made it into a streamlined 75? Does the credit go to the person who wins the Pro Tour with it? But I think the important thing here is that, as you said, you know what you did. You know that you 100% contributed to defining certain things that made people successful. And I would have to hope that the people who did well with your ideas, they also know what you did. So it's not that important that the general public, some rando like me knows that you did it or not. It's important that within your player group, you are respected, or you are seen as someone who did that, right?
I didn't really consider myself to be a good deck builder for a long time. Whenever we worked for Star City Games, one of the common asks when a new set would come out would be build a bunch of decks around this new card. Like pick a card, build a bunch of decks around it. And I hated doing that because I didn't get to physically play with the decks I was building. And so I was unable to essentially hone the deck down into like a what I would consider to be like a fighting shaped version. And instead I'm just kind of like shooting deck lists off. And whenever we would play on Versus Live, my decks would get destroyed because they're like the purest form iteration of the deck before you start pulling away from the core identity to shore up weaknesses. Every deck that I build comes from an old philosophy from a friend of mine when I was very young. He said to always start building your decks with maximum redundancy. And so if you can play 8 elves, play 8. If you can play 12, play 12. And then over time, you'll see where your weaknesses lie and you can pare back. And so once you realize like, oh, I have too many card draw effects, or I have too many tutors, or I have too many of this or that, you pull back and you add a couple more removal spells or a couple more things that can alleviate some pressure from your opponent until you ultimately have a viable deck. Playing on the Pro Tour for so long, you realize that the people who were most successful were often those that had large play groups where they were able to essentially find all the flaws and remove the flaws from those early decks. And for those of you who don't remember, almost every single Pro Tour was 2 weeks after a set's release. And so you just did not have a functional deck unless you had some group to play test with. And over time...
Unless you have a brain trust, right? Yeah.
Right. The running of like the SCG Tour was a huge place for you to test those ideas. And often I would play the first or second week of a new format that the SCG Tour is hosting. And that's where like Monogrieve Dungrove Elder came from or whatever, where I just like built this deck I thought was cool, did well with it. Then I played it at the Pro Tour the next week. It was my best Pro Tour finish ever. But I had a place to run a trial by fire. And the testing groups all had that, and I was just a nobody from Alabama, man. I didn't know anyone. Like, I didn't have a super group. I didn't have a testing group ever. Like, maybe 3 Pro Tours I ever played, I had a testing group. And so, uh, whenever you're just like constructing a new deck, you just have no idea truly how good it is until you play it for the first time. And I hated building decks that way because you're just firing into the air blindly in hopes that you hit something. And so I never considered myself to be like a prolific deck builder. But at some point on Jerry Thompson's podcast, it's Arena Deckless is the name of the podcast now. But at some point, he just mentioned me as one of the best deck builders he'd interacted with, and I was thrown for a loop. I'd never really thought.
You never thought of yourself that way.
Yeah,
right?
I was a tuner, man. I took an idea that someone else had, and I would make it better, and that was kind of like what I like to do.
But that's what it's about. Like, most of the time, that's what it's about.
Yeah,
it's those 8 cards, right?
Yeah, but it's just like you said, man. I just never really thought of myself like that because I was rarely the person that was like, oh, this 2-card combo, this is the messed up thing. Nowadays, though, when I'm brewing on stream, that's all that I like to do. That's all that I'm trying to do is find Tyvar plus Priest of Forgotten Gods. I'm trying to find Rona plus Retraction Helix Mox Amber. And more recently, like, someone on Twitter was just like, hey, this Wild Growth Walker plus Amalia combo is pretty insane. And so I just spent like 3 days working on that and came up with...
Hell yeah. I mean, that's a revolution right there.
Right. And I just came up with like a cool list that I really liked, and I wrote about it, and people really enjoyed it. And I'm planning on doing a lot of that in the next week whenever they do the bans, because everything's going to change, and it's like the Wild West, man.
So you still find joy in the game in your own ways. Like, you're evolving as a player, and you're learning still. You're still a student, it sounds like, taking inputs from the community.
Absolutely, man. Playing on stream, building decks by myself, showing them to the world, and then other people having success with them. There's like not really a better feeling. I don't know.
Before I let you go, I gotta ask you about this non-Magic topic.
Uh-oh.
I've never played the game. Lorcana.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you started a podcast about this.
I did.
Right?
Yeah.
What is it about Lorcana, like, other than the Disney brand and the IP? Like, is it that good of a game? Like, I have no idea. I know there's an emulator you can play it on, because you talked about it, I think, before in your tweets. Like, as someone like me who's never tried this game, like, can you sell me on the game?
Okay, so the lead designer used to work on Magic in the 90s, early 2000s, and they have created a game that I think is not only functional, but the engine itself is robust. Their first set that they came out with, which, we're basically playing one set constructed or whatever, had roughly 6 viable archetypes that were all pretty decent, with 2 floating to the top. They just released their second set, and I think that it actually has probably made the format a bit worse, because it essentially is just like that same deck that was already the best deck just kind of gravitated more towards the top because it got the most new tools. But as far as the game is concerned, it's a good engine, and if they are on top of it in terms of banning stuff that's problematic or format management in general, I think they're going to be very successful. But they're going to be successful for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that the game is good. The second reason is that it is a universally loved IP, and they have so much to draw from in terms of resources from the characters that exist at Disney, that they're never going to run out of ideas, because they are essentially creating cards that are snapshots of the very popular characters in random situations. And they have also gotten license from Disney to change the scenarios in which these characters can exist in. For example, Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, there's a new version of him that's, they call it Floodborn or Dreamborn, where it's like a made-up version of the character. And in this reality, he's smart. Instead of like a big dumb guy, he's like a genius. And so like his character in the card does something that another smart character does, but it's Gaston, right? But it's just like I don't know. It's just like the What If series from Marvel, but
Yeah, they can do alternate universe Disney basically.
exactly. And so if I just told you that it's very similar to Magic in terms of complexity, the engine is pretty strong, and the design team clearly knows what they're doing in terms of just like making things that are fun or explosive. I think that the game's got a very bright future. I tried my best to kind of jumpstart, organized play with a big invitational that we did. It was only 16 people big. We invited 12 competitors. We had 4 slots up for grabs. We got some sponsors. We gave away $5,000, and it was by all metrics a success in terms of like the first of a thing. And I'm very happy with what we did, and I look forward to doing more in the future. With that said, I don't know that the company itself has big plans for organized play, but I think that there's enough interest in the game that they'll have something going in the next year or two. And if you like playing Magic tournaments, you should try Lorcana. It's really fun.
Do you often dabble in other card games other than Magic?
I have spent my life just picking a thing that I enjoy and just running it into the ground. And when I was growing up in Alabama, there was a local game store I went to called Legion, formerly Empire Comics. That's how they always answered the phone because they had to change their name for legal reasons. They would have a big play group that would regularly stop playing Magic and start playing another game for a few months. And I would always jump to the next game with them. And I played, Dot Hack Sign card game. I played this one awesome card game called Magi Nation. And I was the youngest of my play group, and I put them all in the dirt. They hated me.
So you pick up these things pretty quickly then?
I tried to, and I mostly just really like being good at stuff. And I don't love jumping to new games because learning a new game often takes a lot of time and energy. And when I'm like really invested in something like Magic, playing a game that's very similar to Magic often has diminishing returns because the people who play one are often the same that play the other. And so the player pool of people who can hand me $5 is just significantly lower than what it could be. And when we started this podcast, like, I just want to be clear that I know that I'm not going to be making money off this podcast for at least a year, maybe multiple years. But I started in such a way where I gave myself a lot of runway, where the group that I'm working with are all like really talented individuals who really know their stuff. From our video editor, Dan May, my co-host is Harlan Fear, another very decorated player from the SCG Tour days. And he even won our invitational, which is, inside info or whatever, I guess. I don't know. But the fact that he won looks good, but it also looks kind of bad. But, the game is good. The podcast is going great. It's called Lost Boys Lorcana. We can just call us the Lost Boys. It's at Lost Boys LOR on Patreon, on YouTube, and on Twitter. And if you're interested in Lorcana, you can check us out there. But I really enjoy playing the game, talking about the game. I bought one booster box. That was all I could buy because first set was just extremely hard to get. But we play often on an emulator. It's a fan-made emulator called Pixelborn that has a functional engine. It like does everything for you when you cast a card. It's very fluid, and it's made by one guy. So I hope that one guy gets hired by Ravensburger to make their digital client, because he's already made it and it's good. And they could just...
That's a great opportunity for Ravensburger.
Right.
Yeah,
they could just give him the opportunity, to hire a team to really make it great. And because it's already pretty good in this one dude. So,
yeah. Well, hey, thank you, Todd, so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, this is so fun, and this is one of the more Magic strategy episodes I've had for Humans of Magic, and it's awesome because you're just someone who loves Magic, and it just really shows. Like, you just love talking about the game, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thanks for having me, James. It was a pleasure, man. Like you said, I do really love Magic, and a lot of that comes from just being hyper competitive as a child, but I'll say this. I used to watch my stepdad read books on bridge, And whenever I asked him about bridge, he just like wouldn't tell me about it because it was like too complex or whatever. And now all I ever want to do is talk about the thing that I am really interested in, so that other people don't feel stupid and they can get good at the thing that they like.
There you go. Todd Anderson, breaking things down, breaking the complex into simple for the every man or woman or person. I think that's the Tandy brand, I hope. Thank you for listening to Humans of Magic. You've made it to the end. Thanks so much. You're awesome. If you'd like to support the show, there are two ways to do so. The first way is the most powerful. Tell a friend. Tell them to check out Humans of Magic. I'd love it if you could spread the word. The second way is to join the Humans of Magic Patreon at patreon.com/humansofmagic. Patreon is the best way to directly support the show from a financial perspective. For as little as $2 a month, you can support me and join the Discord. It gives me the power to keep cranking out new episodes with your favorite Magic people. If you want to go the $5 support route, you'll get a digital copy of the Humans of Magic book. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you, as always, making it all the way to the end, and we'll see you next time.